Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash conquered the battle frontier and Scott rewarded him with Greta, Lucy, and Anabel. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Sovereign of the Frontier. The air was frozen static, thick with the pressure of a legend on the verge of collapse. It wasn't just the chill leaking from the colossal golem of ancient ice that dominated the battlefield, it was the suffocating weight of expectation. Every soul in the battle pyramid arena held their breath, a collective silence that felt louder than any cheer. On one side stood Brandon, the Pyramid King, a man carved from the same stoic grit as the ruins he guarded. His red ice was a fortress of pale blue, its crystalline body pristine, its power an inexorable glacier. On the other side, there was only Ash and a very small, very tired yellow mouse. Pikachu's breath came in ragged bursts, his fur matted with sweat and grime. One ear drooped. His body was a tapestry of bruises, a testament to the war he'd waged. He'd already outlasted 3 of his teammates against Brandon's titans. Now, he was all that was left. Pikachu, can you still go? Ash's voice was low, cutting through the stadium's hush. It wasn't a command or a plea. It was a question between partners, a final check-in before the end of the world. Pikachu's head snapped up, his black-tipped ears perking. His cheeks, small sacs of incredible power, sparked with a defiant, sputtering light. Pika! The cry was hoarse, but the fire in his eyes burned as brightly as ever. It was all the answer Ash needed. Regice, lock on. End this with Zap Cannon, Brandon commanded, his voice echoing with the finality of a judge's gavel. The golem's 7-dotted eye glowed with an ominous crimson light, locking onto Pikachu's exhausted form. A sphere of crackling, unstable electricity began to coalesce in front of it, humming with a sound that promised oblivion. A Zap Cannon, supercharged by a legendary Pokémon and guided by Lock-On, was not something you dodged. It was something you endured, and nothing endured it. The crowd let out a collective gasp. This was it. The brutal, inevitable conclusion. But Ash wasn't looking at the attack. He was looking at Pikachu. And in that shared gaze, a silent conversation unfolded, a strategy born from 1,000 battles, 1,000,000 miles traveled together. There was no panic in Ash's eyes, only a sharp, crystalline focus. Pikachu, spin, he yelled, a half-second before Regice fired. It was an insane command. A stationary target was a dead target. A moving one was just a more challenging one for an attack that couldn't miss. But Pikachu didn't hesitate. He poured the last of his reserves into his legs, kicking up dust as he began to rotate on the spot, a tiny, furry top of yellow and black. Now, counter shield. The crowd murmured, confused. That was a contest move, a defensive flourish. What good was that against a Zap Cannon? Pikachu unleashed a torrent of electricity, not at Regice, but around himself. The thunderbolt didn't shoot outward, it wrapped around his spinning body, creating a spiraling vortex of pure lightning. It was a technique born of necessity in Sinnoh, a shield made of offense. The Zap Cannon fired. The crackling sphere of doom rocketed across the field. It didn't waver. It didn't deviate. It slammed directly into the vortex of spinning electricity. The explosion was blinding. A concussive force ripped through the arena, making the stone pyramid itself seem to groan. A cloud of energized dust and smoke billowed outwards, obscuring the entire field. For a moment, the only sound was the high-pitched whine of residual energy. When the smoke began to clear, the silence returned, heavier than before. Regice stood unscathed, a monument of ice. But on the other side of the field, there was a small crater, and nothing else. A woman in the front row gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Scott, the flamboyant owner of the battle frontier, who was watching from a private balcony, leaned forward, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. Brandon's stern expression softened with something that looked like regret. It was a valiant effort. But Ash hadn't taken his eyes off the spot. His jaw was set. His fists were clenched. He could still feel it. That thin, thrumming tether that connected his soul to Pikachu's. It was strained, stretched to its breaking point, but it hadn't snapped. Not yet, Ash whispered, a silent prayer. And then, from the dust cloud, a flicker. A single, defiant spark. Pikachu was still standing. Barely. He was scorched, trembling, his counter shield shattered. He looked like a candle flame in a hurricane, one breath away from being extinguished forever. But he was standing. He had grounded the Zap cannon through his own body, redirecting its immense power into the earth beneath him, a feat of endurance that was physically impossible. It survived. Brandon's composure finally cracked, a fissure of disbelief in his stony facade. He did more than survive, Ash said, his voice rising, imbued with a new, resonant power. He absorbed it. He's holding it. Now, Pikachu. Pikachu's body began to glow. It wasn't the warm, familiar light of his own electricity. It was a violent, unstable aura of borrowed power, the raw, untamed energy of Regis' Zap cannon churning inside his tiny frame. His fur stood on end, crackling. Volt tackle. Ash roared, the command a physical thing, a punch to the air. This wasn't a strategic order anymore. This was a release. A desperate, all-or-nothing detonation. Pikachu became a comet. He launched himself across the field, cloaked in a blinding shroud of his own golden lightning mixed with the chaotic, silver-blue energy of the Zap cannon he had somehow contained. He wasn't just using Volt Tackle, he was a living Volt Tackle, an incandescent projectile of pure will. Brandon's eyes widened. Regice, Ice Beam, full power. The glacial titan fired a beam of absolute zero, a blast of cold so intense it frosted the very air it passed through. It was a collision of unstoppable forces. The golden comet of a boy and his mouse against the unyielding Arctic blast of a legend. For a heartbeat, they were matched. Fire and ice. Spirit and stoicism. The two energies tore at each other in the center of the arena, a maelstrom of light and fury that screamed and howled. And then Ash did something no one saw coming. He closed his eyes. He didn't shout another command. He didn't brace for impact. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his very being. He focused on that tether, that bond with Pikachu, and he pushed. He poured everything he had into it, his hope, his exhaustion, his unwavering belief. He poured his own energy, his own aura, down that line. On the balcony, Scott jolted as if he'd been struck by lightning. The decorative lights around his suite flickered and died. A woman with long, dark hair and an unervingly calm demeanor, seated several rows away, stiffened, her hand instinctively going to the Sevapur-shaped tattoo on her arm. In another section, a fiery young woman with spiky black hair shot to her feet, her eyes wide with shock, feeling a surge of fighting spirit that wasn't her own. And in a shadowed corner of the pyramid, a girl with lavender hair gasped, her psychic senses overwhelmed by a sudden, blinding flare of pure, unfiltered emotion, a feeling of absolute, unshakable connection. Down on the field, the effect was cataclysmic. The golden light of Volt Tackle didn't just grow brighter, it intensified, deepened, becoming something more profound. It swallowed the ice beam whole. The comet didn't break through the Arctic blast, it consumed it. Pikachu struck Regice. There was no sound. Not at first. Just a flash of white light that bleached all color from the world. The silence was absolute, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then the sound hit. It wasn't an explosion. It was a deep, resonant chime, like a colossal tuning fork had been struck. The wave of force that emanated from the point of impact wasn't destructive. It was, clarifying. It washed over the arena, over the crowd, a wave of pure, concentrated energy. It felt like the moment after a storm breaks, when the air is clean and the world is sharp and new. When vision returned, Regice was still standing, but its crystalline body was spiderwebbed with 1,000 tiny cracks. It held its form for a long, agonizing second before it dissolved, collapsing into a heap of shimmering, inert ice shards. Across the field, Pikachu lay in a small heap, unconscious, smoke curling gently from his body. And in the center of it all stood Ash Ketchum, his arms still outstretched, his expression one of profound exhaustion and even greater shock. He lowered his arms slowly, feeling a strange emptiness, a lightness in his own chest, as if he had given away a piece of himself. The referee, looking utterly stunned, finally found his voice. He raised his flag. Regice is unable to battle. Pikachu is, also unable to battle. However, as Trainer Brandon has no more Pokémon remaining, the victory, and the brave symbol, goes to Ash Ketchum of Pallet Town. The silence broke. The roar from the crowd was deafening, a physical force of pure adulation. But Ash barely heard it. He was already running, his legs pumping, his heart hammering in his chest. He slid to his knees beside his partner, gently scooping the small, limp form into his arms. "Pikachu, we did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He held him close, a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought him to his knees washing over him. Brandon walked over, his usual stoicism replaced by an expression of deep, contemplative awe. He didn't look at Pikachu. He looked at Ash. "That was not a Pokémon battle," Brandon said, his voice quiet but intense. "That was something else entirely. The bond you share, it manifested. It became tangible." He knelt, placing a hand on the ground, feeling a faint, residual warmth in the stone. "I have guarded these ruins for decades. I have communed with the legends. But I have never felt anything like that. What are you, boy?" Ash looked up, cradling Pikachu protectively. He had no answer. He just knew that in that final moment, winning hadn't been enough. He had needed to reach Pikachu, to hold him up, and something inside him had simply responded. He was still trying to process it when a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Scott, the frontier owner, standing there. The usual garish Hawaiian shirt and oversized sunglasses were present, but the kilowatt smile was gone. His face was a mask of unreadable gravity. "Ash," Scott said, his tone devoid of its usual theatrics. "Walk with me. We have a great deal to discuss." The infirmary was quiet, the only sound the soft, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. Pikachu was sleeping soundly in a small bed, his energy levels slowly returning to normal. Nurse Joy had assured Ash it was just profound exhaustion, a diagnosis that felt woefully inadequate for what had happened. Ash sat beside him, his new, gleaming brave symbol resting on the nightstand, the weight of it feeling strangely insignificant. He'd done it. He'd conquered the battle frontier. He had beaten 7 of the strongest trainers he'd ever met, each a master of their craft. It was the culmination of his entire journey through Hoenn, a victory that should have felt like the peak of a mountain. Instead, it felt like the edge of a cliff. "What are you, boy?" Brandon's question echoed in his head. The door swished open and Scott stepped inside. He had changed out of his usual flamboyant attire into a simple, dark jacket. The absence of color was more alarming than the brightest Hawaiian print. "He'll be fine," Scott said, his voice low. It wasn't a question. "That little guy has more spirit in his tail than most trainers have in their entire bodies." He walked over to the window, looking out at the sprawling complex of the battle frontier under the setting sun. "What was that, Scott?" Ash asked, his voice raw. "Out there. In the final second. It felt like," he struggled for the words. "Like I was right there with him. Like I pushed him." "You did," Scott said, turning from the window. His expression was heavy. "What you felt, what you used. The people of Sinnoh have a name for it. They call it aura. The essence of all life. Most humans who can sense it are born into special families, trained from birth. They can use it to calm wild Pokemon, to feel emotions. A few, the rarest of the rare, can use it to fight. But what you did, that was different. You didn't just use it. You resonated with it. You amplified your bond with Pikachu and turned it into a weapon. Ash stared at him, bewildered. He remembered the Riolu in Sinnoh, the Aura Guardian Sir Aaron. It had always felt like a myth, a piece of ancient history. Not something that was a part of him. The battle frontier is a lie, Ash, Scott said bluntly, the words dropping into the quiet room like stones. Well, not a complete lie. It is a challenge for the world's strongest trainers. But that's not its primary purpose. He pulled up a chair, sitting opposite Ash, leaning forward with an intensity that made Ash feel like the arena had shrunk to the space between them. For generations, my family has been a part of a quiet organization, Scott began. We are watchers. Sentinels. We've noticed something over the past few decades. A change. It's slow, subtle. You wouldn't see it unless you were looking for it. A sort of static. A creeping grayness. Places in the world where the color seems a little duller, where the sounds are a little flatter. Where Pokemon lose their spirit and people lose their passion. It's like the world's life force is a radio signal, and something out there is slowly, methodically, turning down the volume. Ash thought of the strange, lifeless forests he'd sometimes passed through, the towns where the people seemed to be moving in a haze. He'd always chalked it up to a local problem, a curse, a weird phenomenon. He never imagined it was all connected. We don't know what it is, Scott continued. A consciousness, a force, an entropy of the soul. We call it the null. It seems to feed on the absence of connection. On loneliness. Despair. Apathy. And it's getting stronger. The static is growing louder. He gestured around them. The battle frontier was built for one reason, to find someone who could fight it. We needed more than just a strong trainer with powerful Pokemon. We needed a harmonizer. A sovereign. Someone whose bonds are so powerful, whose spirit is so bright, that they can reignite the world's fading light. Someone who doesn't just command Pokemon, but connects with them on a fundamental, soul-deep level. We built this crucible to find a person who could produce a moment just like the one you did today. A moment where the bond itself becomes a source of power. Ash felt a chill that had nothing to do with Regice. This was bigger than leagues, bigger than championships. This was the fabric of the world. So the symbols, the victory. It was all real, Scott assured him. You earned every bit of it. You are the champion of the battle frontier. But with that title comes a burden. And a choice. He paused, his gaze unwavering. I cannot order you to do this. The world doesn't even know it needs saving. But I am asking you to lead the charge against this emptiness. I can give you resources, intel, a direction. But you would be the tip of the spear. Ash looked from Scott's grave face to Pikachu's sleeping form. His entire life had been a series of steps on a journey, but he'd never really known where the path was leading. He just knew he had to keep walking, to get stronger, to meet every Pokemon and person he could. Maybe this was why. Not for badges or glory, but for this. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. What do I have to do? Ash asked, his voice steady. A flicker of relief, of profound respect, crossed Scott's face. You won't be alone. You can't do this alone. The Sovereign is a beacon, not a solitary soldier. You need a vanguard. A team built not just on power, but on a specific kind of resonance. He stood and walked to the door. And that brings us to your reward for conquering the frontier. He opened the door. Standing in the hallway, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, tension, and apprehension, were three women Ash knew all too well. First was Greta, the arena tycoon. Her spiky black hair seemed to defy gravity, and her eyes, sharp and intense, immediately locked onto Ash. She stood with her feet planted, a coiled spring of kinetic energy. She wasn't just standing there, she was occupying the space, daring it to challenge her. Ash remembered their battle vividly, a whirlwind of pure fighting spirit that had pushed him and Snorlax to their absolute limits. Next to her, a stark contrast, was Lucy, the Pike Queen. Tall, elegant, and severe. Her long, dark hair framed a face that was beautiful but remote, her gaze cool and analytical. She held herself with an unnerving stillness, her presence a quiet weight in the room. Her battle had been one of psychological warfare, her Sevapur a venomous extension of her own unflinching will. She looked at Ash not like a person, but like a puzzle she was still trying to solve. And finally, standing slightly behind the other two, was Anabel, the Salon Maiden. Her lavender hair and gentle demeanor belied an incredible power. Her eyes, wide and empathetic, weren't just looking at Ash, they seemed to be looking into him. Ash's battle with her had been the strangest of all. She hadn't needed to speak a single command, her telepathic link with her Pokémon creating a seamless, unpredictable force that had almost overwhelmed him. They stepped into the room, the space suddenly charged with their combined presence. It felt less like a reunion and more like a summit. "You all felt it, didn't you?" Scott said, addressing the three women. "During your battles with him. And again, today. You each filed an anomalous report." Greta scoffed, though her eyes never left Ash. "Anomalous report? I told you it felt like I was fighting a force of nature. His spirit, his will to win, it was like a physical thing. I felt it in my bones. It pushed back against mine. I felt his resolve," Lucy said, her voice a low, smooth monotone that sent a shiver down Ash's spine. "Everyone I face flinches. They show fear, hesitation, something. It's what I feed on. He didn't. Not for a second. It was illogical. His eyes were completely clear." Anabel simply nodded, her gaze soft but piercing as it rested on Ash. "When I battled him, I connected to his Pokémon to anticipate their moves. But I heard him. His voice, his heart, clear as a bell, urging them on. It was overwhelming. Today," she added, her voice barely a whisper, when that light flared. "I felt it from miles away. It felt like hope." Scott turned back to Ash. "These three aren't just powerful brains, Ash. They are uniquely attuned to the different facets of your own power. Greta to your fighting spirit. Lucy to your unshakable resolve. Anabel to the very aura that binds you to your Pokémon. Together, you form a chord, a resonant frequency that we believe can push back the silence." He then addressed the women directly. "The choice I offered Ash, now offer you. Your lives are your own. You can return to the frontier, to your titles and your battles. No one will think less of you. Or, you can forfeit all of that. You can step off the map and join a war that no one will ever thank you for fighting." "You would answer to him," he said, gesturing to Ash. "Not as a boss, but as a leader. A focal point." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of that proposition. Three of the strongest trainers in the world, masters of their own domains, being asked to follow a 17-year-old boy from Pallet Town. Greta was the first to break it. She took a step forward, planting herself directly in front of Ash's chair. He had to crane his neck to look up at her. She radiated an intimidating heat. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice a low growl. "You want me to give up my arena, my title, everything I've built, to go on some ghost hunt led by him?" Her eyes bored into his. "I felt your spirit, kid. It's impressive. But spirit doesn't win a war. Leading isn't the same as fighting. Why in the world should I, or anyone, follow you?" It was a direct challenge, a test of dominance. Ash didn't flinch. He met her fiery gaze and, for the first time since the battle, a spark of the old, familiar confidence returned to his eyes. He wasn't a kid anymore, and he wasn't going to be treated like one. He stood up, slowly. He was still shorter than her, but he stood with a grounded presence that made the height difference seem irrelevant. "You shouldn't," he said, his voice calm and clear. "You shouldn't follow me. You should stand with me. Scott's right, I don't know how to lead a war. I only know how to fight what's in front of me. And I know I can't do it by myself. I felt what you have, too, Greta. A fire that never goes out. I could use a fire like that on my side." He wasn't placating her. He was acknowledging her strength, seeing her as an equal, a powerful ally. Greta's intense glare wavered for a fraction of a second. She hadn't expected that. She had expected a boast, or a nervous justification. She hadn't expected respect. She let out a sharp, grudging breath. Humph, she didn't move, but the challenge in her posture softened almost imperceptibly. Then Lucy spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a shard of ice. "This is statistically improbable to succeed. We are 4 trainers against a faceless, cosmic-level threat we don't understand. We will be operating outside of any official jurisdiction, which means the leagues will eventually see us as a threat. The risk is astronomical, the reward non-existent. It is, by all logical metrics, a fool's errand." She was dismantling the plan with cold, sharp logic. She was testing his resolve, looking for the crack. Ash turned to her. He didn't try to argue her points. He knew she was right. "You're probably right," he admitted, shocking her into a brief silence. "The odds are terrible. But I've been facing terrible odds my whole life. They don't scare me. What scares me is that static Scott was talking about. A world without spirit, without passion, without the bond one have with Pikachu." He glanced at his sleeping partner. "That's not a world I want to live in. So, if fighting for it is a fool's errand, then I guess I'm a fool. But I've never let that stop me before." Lucy's eyes, usually so distant and analytical, focused on him with a new intensity. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was stating a fact about who he was. He saw the impossible odds and simply walked toward them. It was the same illogical clarity she'd felt in their battle. A quiet, stubborn refusal to break. For the first time, she saw it not as a curiosity, but as a strength. A foundation. Finally, Anabel stepped forward, her movement silent. The other 2 had challenged him with fire and ice. She approached with a quiet vulnerability that was more disarming than either. She stopped a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her. "When you fought me," she began, her voice soft, "I felt your frustration. Your confusion. But underneath it all, you were trying to understand. You weren't just trying to win. You were trying to connect." She looked at him, and her psychic sensitivity was a wide-open book. She could feel the exhaustion warring with the immense, stubborn core of his will. She could feel the echo of that brilliant, blinding light from the arena. "You feel it too, don't you? The quiet. The growing emptiness. It wasn't a test. It was a shared secret." Ash looked into her eyes, which seemed to hold a universe of feeling, and he knew he didn't need to explain anything to her. She already understood. "Yes," he said, the single word holding all the weight of Scott's revelation. Anabel nodded, a sad, small smile touching her lips. That was all she needed to hear. She took a small, decisive step to the side, aligning herself with him. It was a simple movement, but it was an answer. She was in. Greta watched Anabel, then looked back at Ash. She saw the way he'd met her challenge head-on, the way he'd acknowledged Lucy's logic without bending to it, the way he'd given Anabel the simple truth she sought. He hadn't tried to be anything he wasn't. He hadn't commanded or demanded. He had just been, himself. A stubborn, ridiculously determined, and strangely charismatic rock in the center of the room. She let out a sharp, barking laugh that startled everyone. A fool's errand and a ghost hunt. Fine. It sounds more interesting than beating up rookies in the arena all day. She cracked her knuckles, the sound like gunshots in the quiet room. I'm in. But if you get us all killed, I'm haunting you. 2 down. All eyes turned to Lucy. She stood perfectly still, her gaze sweeping over Ash, Greta, and Anabel. She was a queen on her throne, evaluating the pieces on the board. A fiery, unpredictable knight. A sensitive, powerful bishop. And a king who didn't seem to know he was wearing a crown. It was a chaotic, illogical, and deeply sentimental combination. It should have been a strategic nightmare. But as she looked at Ash, at the unwavering resolve in his eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: curiosity. A desire to see how this impossible equation played out. Her life as a pike queen was controlled, predictable, solitary. This was the opposite of all those things. The first rule of the battle pike is to expect the unexpected, she said, her voice even. This qualifies. She gave a single, sharp nod. My conditions are that strategy is respected and my counsel is heard. If you can agree to that, I will join this endeavor. Of course, Ash said without hesitation. I'd be an idiot not to listen to you. Lucy's lips quirked in a smile so faint it was barely there, but it was there. An accurate assessment. Scott, who had been watching the entire exchange with the focus of a hawk, finally let out a long, slow breath. He had staked everything on this moment, on his reading of these 4 individuals. And he had been right. Then it settled, he said, a genuine smile finally gracing his features. The team is formed. He looked at the 4 of them, a mismatched collection of fire, ice, heart, and will, all centered around the young man from Pallet Town. Your journey starts tomorrow. Get some rest. The world has gotten a little grayer while we've been talking. He gave them a final, meaningful look before stepping out and closing the door, leaving the 4 of them alone in the quiet infirmary. The silence that fell was different now. It wasn't tense or awkward. It was the silence of a beginning. The air was thick with unspoken questions and the immense, terrifying weight of their shared purpose. Ash looked from Greta's impatient energy to Lucy's watchful calm, to Anabel's gentle strength. They were all looking back at him, waiting. He was their leader. It was a title he hadn't asked for, but one he now wore. He took a breath, the first one that felt truly his since the battle had ended. The exhaustion was still there, a heavy cloak on his shoulders. But underneath it, something new was taking root. A sense of clarity. Of purpose. He wasn't just a trainer on a journey anymore. He was a guardian. A sentinel. A sovereign. And this was his vanguard. He gave them a small, determined smile. Okay, he said, the word simple but filled with a world of conviction. Let's get to work. Chapter 3, The Dragons gazed. The silence of the whispering woods clung to them like a shroud. It was a psychic residue, a stain of absolute emptiness that Anabel felt as a constant, low-frequency hum at the base of her skull. It had been 3 days since they'd restored the corrupted, ancient Trevenant, 3 days since they had stared into the soulless eyes of a husk and seen the face of their enemy. They had won, but the victory felt hollow, like punching smoke. The Trevenant was healing, its life force slowly returning, but the memory of its vacant agony was a ghost that haunted them all. They had retreated to Rustboro City to lick their wounds, both physical and metaphysical. It was a city of stone and ambition, a hub of commerce and education that felt a world away from the creeping dread they'd faced. They sat at a small, out-of-the-way outdoor cafe, trying to melt back into the mundane flow of humanity. It wasn't working. They were a jagged island of tension in a placid sea of afternoon shoppers and chattering students from the trainer school. Greta jabbed at her salad with a fork, her movements sharp and aggressive. I still say we should have burned that entire section of the forest to the ground, she muttered, not for the first time. Sterilize the area. Make sure no trace of that thing was left. And destroy a unique ecosystem, potentially harming dozens of other innocent Pokémon and angering a guardian spirit that was a victim, not a villain. Lucy countered, her voice calm as she sipped her tea. She hadn't touched her food. A brutish and inefficient solution. Your answer to everything cannot be, punch it harder. It works more often than you'd think, Greta shot back, her eyes flashing. Ash said nothing, staring into the depths of his lukewarm coffee. He could still see the husked revenant's eyes, dull and glassy, devoid of the ancient wisdom they should have held. He had felt its emptiness, a void where a soul should have been. Greta was right, the impulse to destroy it, to eradicate the contamination, was strong. But Lucy was right, too. Their mission wasn't to destroy, it was to protect. To reignite. How could they do that with scorched earth tactics? He felt the familiar weight of leadership settle on him, the responsibility of finding the balance between the fire and the ice at his table. He was about to speak when he saw Anabel flinch. Her hand went to her temple, her expression tightening with pain. Her own cup of untouched herbal tea rattled in its saucer. Anabel? You okay? Ash asked, his voice low and concerned. She closed her eyes, taking a slow, shaky breath. It's not the forest, she whispered, her voice tight. It's something else. Something new. It feels like a searchlight. A very, very powerful one. It's not looking for something. It's looking for us. Greta immediately stopped her assault on the lettuce, her head snapping up, her senses on high alert. Lucy set her teacup down with a silent, deliberate click, her cool gaze sweeping the crowded plaza. They had been careful, using back roads and avoiding official Pokémon centers, paying for everything in cash. They thought they were ghosts. What kind of searchlight? Ash pressed, leaning forward. Psychic? No, Anabel said, shaking her head. The hum in her skull was intensifying. It's not psychic. It's intent. Pure, focused will. It's like a trained predator scanning a field for a mouse. It's getting closer. Ash's hand instinctively went to the pokeball on his belt that held Pikachu, who was snoozing on the chair beside him. Scott warned us this might happen. That we wouldn't stay a secret for long. Secret? Greta snorted. We're three frontier brains and the guy who just conquered the whole circuit traveling together. We're about as secret as a Snorlax in a minefield. The League was bound to notice. The question is, what will they do when they find us? Lucy mused, her eyes narrowed in thought. They have no jurisdiction over the frontier brains when we are not at our facilities. And Ash is a private citizen. Legally, they can only question us. I have a feeling whoever this is isn't coming to ask questions, Ash said grimly. Anabel's eyes snapped open. The pain was gone, replaced by a sudden, stark fear. The searchlight had stopped sweeping. It had locked on. It's here, she breathed. The air in the plaza shifted. The cheerful chatter of the crowd didn't stop, but a new sound began to bleed through it, a deep, rhythmic thump-thump-thump that was more felt than heard. It was the sound of immense wings beating against the air. People started to look up, their conversations faltering. A shadow fell over the square, vast and swift. A woman screamed. A child pointed. Descending from the brilliant blue sky was a creature of legend. Its orange scales seemed to drink the sunlight, its powerful body a perfect fusion of grace and brute force. A pair of small, elegant wings on its back beat with a strength that displaced the very air, creating a downdraft that sent napkins and menus scattering across the cafe patio. It was a dragonite, and it was descending with the unerring purpose of a missile. It landed in the center of the plaza, a dozen yards from their table. The flagstones cracked under the force of its impact. It didn't roar. It didn't need to. Its sheer presence was enough to send a wave of panic through the crowd. People scrambled backward, tripping over chairs and each other, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. And then the man on its back dismounted. He was tall and imposing, clad in a flowing black cape with a high collar, trimmed in red. His crimson hair was as sharp and spiky as his demeanor. He didn't look at the panicking crowd. His gaze, the color of amethyst and just as hard, was fixed solely on their table. On Ash. It was Lance. The champion of the Indigo Plateau. The Dragon Master. The most powerful trainer in 2 regions, and arguably, the entire world. He began to walk toward them, his boots clicking with grim authority on the stone. His Dragonite stood behind him like a loyal, mountain-sized guard dog, its eyes, intelligent and ancient, mirroring its master's intensity. So, Greta whispered, a dangerous grin spreading across her face as she pushed her chair back. They sent the big guy. This should be fun. Stand down, Greta, Ash commanded, his voice sharp but low. He didn't take his eyes off the approaching champion. This is not a fight. It's about to be, she growled. No, it's not, Ash insisted, placing a hand on her arm. His touch was firm, a silent order. She froze, looking from his hand to his face, shocked by the steel in his gaze. He wasn't asking. He was telling her. Reluctantly, she settled back into her chair, though her entire body was thrumming like a plucked guitar string. Lance came to a stop before their table, his shadow falling over them. The sheer pressure of his presence was immense. It was the gaze Anabel had felt, the focused will of a man who was accustomed to bending the world to his liking. Ash Ketchum, Lance said, his voice a low baritone that carried easily over the frightened whispers of the onlookers. It's been some time. I see you've been busy. His eyes swept over Greta, Lucy, and Anabel, a flicker of disapproval in their depths. And you've been collecting impressive, and dangerous, company. Lance, Ash replied, his own voice steady. He stood up, not as a challenge, but as a sign of respect. And to meet the champion's gaze on his own level. What do we owe the pleasure? Rustboro is a long way from the Indigo Plateau. Don't play coy with me, Ash, Lance snapped, his patience clearly thin. You know exactly why I'm here. You and your rogue unit of frontier brains have been lighting up our intelligence network for a week. A localized energy phenomenon, wiping out a section of the Petalburg woods, followed by a mass ecological recovery that defies explanation. You were spotted nearby. Now, you show up here. You are operating outside of any legal framework, using powers we don't understand, and leaving chaos in your wake. This ends. Today. He was speaking to Ash, but his proclamation was for everyone. For the crowd now filming them with their Pokédexes, for the League officials he knew were listening. This was a public condemnation. The only chaos we found was the silence in that forest, champion, Ash countered, his voice ringing with conviction. We didn't cause it. We stopped it. Stopped it? Lance scoffed, taking a step closer. The air crackled with tension. His Dragonite took a half-step forward in unison, a low rumble building in its chest. You expect the Pokémon League to simply accept the word of an unsanctioned vigilante group? We have procedures. We have protocols for containment, for study. You have bypassed all of them. What you see as a solution, I see as a reckless act of unbelievable arrogance. You are tampering with forces you cannot possibly comprehend. This was the heart of it. The ideological divide. Order versus urgency. With all due respect, champion, Lucy's cool voice interjected, cutting through the confrontation with the precision of a surgeon's blade. She hadn't stood, but she leaned forward, her presence suddenly commanding. Your protocols are designed for tangible threats, criminal organizations, rampaging Pokémon, ecological disasters. They are not equipped to handle a threat that operates on a metaphysical level. Lance's gaze snapped to her. The Pike Queen. I should have known your brand of cold calculation was involved in this. And what, precisely, is this metaphysical threat some phantom you're all chasing? It's real, Anabel said, her voice soft but firm. She had risen to stand beside Ash. Her empathic senses were picking up the currents in the conversation. She could feel the rigid fear underneath Lance's authoritative anger, fear of the unknown, of losing control. We saw what it does. It hollows things out. It takes their life, their spirit. It leaves nothing behind. Lance looked at her wide, earnest eyes, and for a moment, he seemed to hesitate. Annabel's presence was disquieting. His dragonite shifted its weight, its head tilting as it sensed her immense psychic potential. It was a power that was not aggressive, but was so vast it felt like standing at the edge of the ocean. It made the dragon uneasy. Hollows things out, Lance repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. He shook off the feeling. This is precisely what I'm talking about. Vague, unsubstantiated claims. You are acting on feelings and whispers. The Pokémon League, the collected strength of the Elite Four and champions of every region, exists to protect the world. We are the shield. And you have decided, on your own, that you know better. He turned his full attention back to Ash, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous command. This is not a request. I am ordering you, as champion of the Indigo League, to stand down. Disband this team. Surrender your Pokémon for evaluation. You and the Frontier Brains will come with me to the League headquarters for a full debriefing. We will take over this investigation. Greta let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. Surrender our Pokémon? Are you out of your mind? I'd like to see you try and take them. She was on her feet now, her fists clenched, her body poised for battle. Tyrogue, her ever-present partner, popped out of his Pokeball, landing in a fighting stance at her feet, mirroring her energy. Lance's eyes narrowed into slits. Arena Tycoon. Your temper is as legendary as your Pokémon. I assure you, this is a fight you cannot win. The standoff was seconds from escalating into open warfare in the middle of a terrified city. Ash saw it in Lance's eyes, in the way his hand twitched, no doubt towards the Pokeball that held his own fearsome ace. Greta, enough. Ash's voice cracked like a whip. He stepped between her and Lance, a physical barrier. He's not our enemy. Then he looked directly at Lance, his gaze unflinching. And we are not yours. But we will not stand down. The sheer audacity of the refusal hung in the air. A 17-year-old trainer, defying the will of a champion to his face. We can't, Ash continued, his voice lowering, becoming more personal, drawing the confrontation inward. You talk about protocols and procedures, about taking over the investigation. How long would that take, Lance? A week for a committee to be formed? A month for them to travel to the site and collect data? Another month for that data to be analyzed? While you're doing that, this null will have consumed another forest. Another city. It's a plague, and it moves faster than bureaucracy. We don't have time. He was using the information Lucy had fed him, the argument they had all discussed. He was showing Lance that this wasn't just youthful rebellion, it was a calculated decision based on the nature of their enemy. The risks of moving too slowly are greater than the risks of us acting on our own, Ash stated, the truth of it resonating in his voice. I know you're trying to protect people. So are we. We're just doing it on the front line, where the threat actually is, not from a boardroom 1,000 miles away. Lance was silent. Ash's words had hit their mark. He was a man of action himself, he understood the frustration of being held back by red tape. But the principle of the matter, the chain of command, was everything to him. To cede that was to invite anarchy. Your argument is compelling, but it is predicated on an unproven premise, Lucy said, her voice a cool balm on the heated exchange. She was playing her role perfectly, providing the logical framework for Ash's passionate declaration. However, let us assume, for a moment, that we are wrong. That this is a delusion. What harm have we caused? We restored a forest that your own rangers had quarantined due to unexplained blight. We have broken no laws. We have harmed no one. By what authority are you ordering us to disband? She had turned his own argument against him. He was acting on suspicion, just as he accused them of doing. He was trying to contain a potential threat, just as they were. The only difference was the scale. Lance's jaw clenched. He was being outmaneuvered, not by force, but by a combination of unshakable conviction, cold logic, and a quiet, empathic power that he couldn't get a read on. He had come here expecting to confront a hot-headed kid and a few rogue trainers. He had found a cohesive, intelligent, and formidable unit, with Ash Ketchum as its undeniable core. He saw the way Greta, for all her fire, had deferred to him. The way Lucy provided support for his position. The way Anabel stood by his side like a silent guardian. This was no accident. This was a team. He had lost the public debate. He knew it. And he could not, would not, order his Dragonite to attack them in the middle of a city full of civilians. It was a line he would not cross. But he could not simply walk away, either. To do so would be to admit defeat, to sanction their continued existence. So he chose another path. The path of the Dragon Master. He took a half-step back, his posture shifting. The facade of the League official fell away, replaced by the raw, untamed power that had made him a champion. The air grew heavy, thick with an almost visible pressure. It was the same overwhelming intent Anabel had felt, now focused into a razor's edge. His eyes, the dragon's gaze, locked onto Ash, and in them was a promise of untold power. You have made your position clear, Ash Ketchum. Lance's voice was a low, dangerous rumble, like stones grinding together deep within the earth. His Dragonite mirrored him perfectly, its head lowering, a growl vibrating in its throat that made the ground tremble. It wasn't a threat of a Pokemon battle. It was the threat of a force of nature. You believe your path is the only one. You believe you are the world's only hope. I believe we're its first line of defense, Ash corrected, his own aura rising to meet the pressure, a small, warm light against a crushing darkness. He would not be intimidated. He would not back down. Then I will give you this one and only warning, Lance said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more menacing than any shout. The Pokemon League will now be monitoring you. Every move you make, we will be watching. We will be there. Stay out of our way. Do not interfere with official League operations. Do not cause a public incident. Because if you give me a reason, any reason at all, to see you as a threat to the stability of this world, I will not send a committee. I will not come to talk. I will come to end this. I will bring the full might of the Elite Four and the G-Men down on you, and I will personally see to it that you are erased. Am I understood? The threat hung in the air, absolute and terrifying. It was not a boast. It was a promise from a man who had the power to keep it. Ash held his gaze for a long, silent moment. He could feel the weight of that promise, the crushing force of the entire Pokemon League apparatus. But behind it, he could also feel the presence of his team. Greta's fiery defiance, Lucy's unshakable calm, Anabel's quiet strength. And beside him, Pikachu had woken up, his cheeks sparking with a low, steady current, ready to stand with him against the world. You'll be watching, Ash said, his voice even. Good. Then you'll see that we're on the same side. It was the final word. A statement of fact, not a concession. Lance held his gaze for another second, then gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. He had delivered his message. He turned without another word, his cape swirling around him, and swung himself back onto his Dragonite's back with practiced ease. With another powerful beat of its wings, the dragon launched itself into the sky, the force of its ascent blasting a hot wind through the plaza. Within seconds, it was just a speck in the sky, and then it was gone. The oppressive pressure vanished, and the sounds of the city rushed back in. But the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. The crowd was silent, staring at the four of them, not with the simple awe of seeing a champion, but with a new mixture of fear, suspicion, and wonder. They weren't just trainers anymore. They were something else. Something that stood against the Pokémon League itself. Greta finally let out the breath she'd been holding. "Okay," she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "I'll admit it. My way probably wouldn't have worked out as well." She looked at Ash, a new level of respect in her eyes. "You handled that. You actually handled him." "We handled him," Ash corrected, glancing at Lucy and Anabel. He felt a deep exhaustion settle over him. The battle of wills had been as draining as any Pokémon fight. But he wasn't wrong. "We're on our own. And now, we have a target on our backs." "A strategically disadvantageous position," Lucy stated, already analyzing the new paradigm. "Our movements are now compromised. Remaining in populated areas is a liability. We have made an enemy of the single most powerful public institution in the world." "He's not our enemy," Anabel repeated softly, watching the spot in the sky where Lance had disappeared. "Not really. He's just afraid. And a man that powerful, when he's afraid, he's the most dangerous thing of all." Ash's Pokegear, a custom model given to him by Scott, began to beep, a secure, encrypted line. He answered it. Scott's face appeared on the small screen, his expression grim. He must have been monitoring the situation. "I take it the meeting with our mutual friend went as poorly as I expected." "You could say that," Ash said dryly. "Listen closely," Scott said, his voice urgent. "Lance isn't bluffing. I'm already getting reports. League intelligence officers are being activated in every major city in Hoenn. They're locking down the region. You need to disappear. Now." "Where do we go?" Ash asked. "Away. I've been tracking another disturbance, a psychic echo similar to the one that preceded the incident in the Whispering Woods, but with a different signature. It's coming from the Sinnoh region. Near the coast. But you can't fly. They'll be watching the airports. You can't take a ferry. They'll be monitoring the ports. So how do we get there?" Greta demanded. "I've made a call. An old friend owes me a favor. There's a tramp steamer, the SS Salus, leaving from the Slateport city docks at midnight tonight. It's a cargo vessel, off the books. It's bound for Sinnoh. It can get you out of Hoenn without being tracked. But you have to get there without being seen." The new reality crashed down on them. They were fugitives. Hunted by the very organization they had once aspired to conquer. All for a fight the world didn't even know was happening. Ash looked at his team. At Greta's fierce readiness, Lucy's calculating gaze, Anabel's worried but resolute expression. The weight on his shoulders felt heavier than ever. He had led them to this. He had stared down the dragon, and now they had to live with the consequences. He ended the call and looked at the map on his Pokegear, charting a path from Rustboro to Slateport, a path they would have to travel through the shadows. "Okay," he said, his voice filled with a weary determination. "Here's the plan." They were no longer just a team. They were outlaws. And their war on the Silence had just become a war on two fronts. Chapter 4, The Seasalt Pact. The SS Salus was a vessel that specialized in being forgotten. Rust clung to her hull in weeping, orange streaks, a testament to a long and thankless life spent hauling unglamorous cargo across unforgiving seas. She smelled of diesel, brine, and boiled cabbage. The crew were a collection of grizzled men who asked no questions and offered no pleasantries, their faces weathered maps of ports Ash had never heard of. For four fugitives trying to disappear, she was perfect. They had slipped through the cordoned-off streets of Slateport like shadows, their Pokémon silent in their pokeballs, the city's energy a stark contrast to their own tense quiet. They were given a cramped, shared cabin below the waterline, a steel box with 4 narrow bunks and a single, grime-streaked porthole that offered a discouraging view of churning, gray water. Privacy was a luxury they could no longer afford. For 3 days, an uneasy truce held. They moved around each other with a careful, practiced economy of motion, the confined space a constant reminder of their forced proximity. Greta paced the narrow corridor outside their cabin like a caged mytina, her kinetic energy having no outlet. Lucy spent hours staring at the endless gray horizon from the stern, her stillness a fortress against the rocking of the ship, her sepulchre coiled loosely at her feet, the only creature on board that seemed as impassive as she was. Anabel was quiet, a fragile candle flame trying not to be extinguished by the psychic residue of their last mission and the oppressive tension of their new reality. Ash found his role was simply to be the center, a point of gravity to keep them from spinning apart. He ran drills with his Pokemon on the small, cluttered foredeck, the repetitive motions a calming mantra. He helped the cook peel potatoes in the galley, listening to the man's rambling stories of waterspouts and ghost ships, grounding himself in the mundane. He was the anchor, and he was starting to feel the strain. The weight of Lance's threat, the horror of the Whispering Woods, the responsibility for the 3 powerful, volatile people who had put their faith in him, it was a heavy cargo. On the 4th day, the sea began to change. The gentle, rhythmic rocking that had become their lullaby grew erratic, then violent. The sky, a uniform blanket of slate gray, darkened to the color of a bruise. The captain, a man with a face like a barnacled rock, had grunted a single word at breakfast: squall. By noon, it was more than a squall. It was a full-blown tempest. The Salus groaned like a dying beast as mountainous waves slammed against her hull, each impact a shuddering blow that resonated through the steel. Rain lashed down, not in drops but in solid, wind-driven sheets that blurred the line between ocean and sky. The world outside their porthole was a churning chaos of black water and white foam. They were confined to their cabin, the deck now a death trap. The space, already small, had shrunk to the size of a prison cell. The air was thick with the smell of wet clothes and unspoken anxiety. Pikachu was curled in Ash's lap, his ears flat against his head, letting out a low, unhappy rumble with every lurch of the ship. Lucy's Milotic was restless in its pokeball, its empathetic nature agitated by the storm's fury. Greta couldn't take it anymore. She shot to her feet, nearly cracking her head on the low ceiling. "That's it," she snapped, her voice tight with pent-up frustration. "I can't just sit here waiting for the ship to fall apart. I'm going to go insane." "And what do you propose we do?" Lucy asked from her bunk, where she was calmly reading a book on advanced battle theory, her focus seemingly absolute despite the ship tilting at a 45-degree angle. "Challenge the waves to a fistfight?" "Don't tempt me," Greta growled, her eyes wild. She looked at Ash, a desperate, challenging glint in her gaze. You're going stir-crazy too, I can see it. You're not built for sitting still any more than I am." Ash looked up from stroking Pikachu's back. She was right. The inaction was a poison. Every crash of a wave felt like a blow he should be dodging, every groan of the ship a cry he should be answering. He felt like a coiled spring. "What did you have in mind?" he asked, already knowing the answer. A predatory grin split her face. "The aft cargo deck. It's small, but it's open to the air. It's got a low railing. Enough room." "For what?" Anabel asked nervously, looking up from where she was trying to meditate. "The crew said no one is to go on deck." "For a spar," Greta said, her eyes locked on Ash. "No Pokemon. Just you and me. We need to burn this off before I start punching holes in the wall." Lucy lowered her book, a single eyebrow raised. "You want to fight, hand to hand, on a wet, tilting steel deck in the middle of a hurricane. The logical flaws in that plan are numerous." "Logic is your department, Pike Queen," Greta shot back, already pulling on a waterproof jacket. "Mine is action." "Well, catch 'em. You in, or are you going to let her talk you out of it?" It was a reckless, insane idea. It was also exactly what he needed. The controlled violence, the physical release, the simplicity of a one-on-one challenge. It was a language he and Greta both understood perfectly. It was a way to connect that didn't require words. He gently placed Pikachu on his bunk. "Stay here, buddy. I'll be back." He stood and grabbed his own jacket. "I'm in." Lucy sighed, a quiet, exasperated sound, and placed a bookmark in her book. Anabel just watched them, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination at the raw, untamed energy crackling between them. The wind hit them like a physical blow the moment they forced the heavy hatch open. It tore the breath from their lungs and screamed in their ears. The rain was icy, stinging their faces. The deck was a terrifying landscape of shifting planes, slick with seawater and bucking like a wild toros. A single misstep would mean a fatal plunge into the churning black abyss of the ocean. They found their spot on the small, grated deck, wedged between a stack of lashed-down shipping containers and the stern railing. The roar of the storm was all-encompassing, a deafening symphony of wind and water. They couldn't have talked if they wanted to. Greta grinned, her face dripping, her eyes alight with a wild joy. This was her element. Chaos. She wiped the rain from her eyes and dropped into a low, wide fighting stance, her hands open and ready. She was grounded, powerful, a part of the storm itself. Ash mirrored her, his own stance more fluid, lighter on his feet. He was used to adapting, to using his opponent's momentum, to finding the calm eye in the center of the hurricane. He took a deep breath of the salt-laced air, feeling the familiar, thrilling hum of an impending battle clear his mind. There was no signal. No bow. The fight began. Greta was pure aggression. She lunged forward, her movements a blur, aiming a sweeping leg kick designed to take his feet out from under him on the slick surface. Ash didn't try to block it. He jumped, using the upward lurch of the ship to gain height, and her foot swept through the space where he had been a second before. He landed lightly, his sneakers finding purchase on the grated metal. He came back at her with a rapid series of jabs, not aiming to hurt, but to test her defenses, to find an opening. She deflected them with contemptuous ease, her forearms like steel bars, each block a jarring impact. The ship rolled violently to starboard, and they both staggered, using the momentum to disengage and reset, their movements instinctively synchronized with the chaos around them. It was a dance as much as a fight. A brutal, beautiful ballet in the heart of the tempest. Every lunge, every parry, every dodge was a statement. Greta was raw power, a sledgehammer seeking to shatter his defenses. Ash was agility and precision, a rapier looking for the single, perfect opening. She fought with her fists and feet, he fought with the deck, the wind, and the waves. She feinted high with her right hand, then dropped low, her fist driving towards his stomach. He saw it coming, but the deck lurched again, throwing off his timing. He couldn't dodge. He braced, taking the blow. It felt like being hit by a Geodude. The air exploded from his lungs, and he stumbled back, his spine slamming into the cold, wet steel of a shipping container. For a second, the world was just the pain in his gut and the roar in his ears. She didn't press the advantage. She stood her ground, giving him a moment, her chest heaving. A sign of respect. This wasn't about winning, it was about the struggle. He pushed himself off the container, a grim smile touching his lips. He'd felt her power now. He understood. He beckoned her on. This time, he initiated. He used the roll of the ship, letting it propel him forward, his movements seemingly clumsy, off balance. It was a feint. As she moved to intercept what she thought was a stumbling charge, he dropped, sliding on the wet deck, his leg hooking around her ankle. He pulled. She went down. But she didn't just fall. She twisted in midair, using her own momentum to roll, breaking her fall with her shoulder and coming up onto one knee in a single, fluid motion. She was back in a defensive crouch before he had even fully recovered his footing. Her eyes burned with a newfound respect. He wasn't just a tough kid. He was smart. Deceptive. The storm reached its crescendo. A colossal wave, a moving wall of black water, crashed over the side of the ship, completely submerging the deck. The force was stunning, a crushing weight of icy water that tore at them, trying to rip them from the ship and drag them into the sea. Ash grabbed onto the railing, his fingers screaming in protest as the torrent tried to peel them away. He saw Greta doing the same, her knuckles white, her teeth gritted, her body slammed against the shipping containers. The water receded with a greedy gurgle, leaving them gasping, soaked to the bone, and shivering. The fight was gone, washed away by a force far greater than either of them. All that was left was survival. They were both breathing hard, the adrenaline of the fight replaced by the primal fear of the ocean. They looked at each other across the small, drenched space. The spar was over. It had ended in a draw, declared by the sea itself. Greta pushed her soaking wet hair out of her face and started to laugh. It was a wild, breathless sound, full of life and exhilaration. "Okay," she gasped, shouting to be heard over the wind. "Okay. You can fight." Ash grinned back, a genuine, tired smile. "So can you." She took a step closer, the narrow space between them suddenly charged with a different kind of energy. It wasn't the tension of combat. It was the aftermath, the shared vulnerability of having pushed each other to their limits and faced down a force of nature together. The roar of the storm seemed to fade into the background. All he could see was her face, flushed with exertion, her eyes, usually so sharp and challenging, now wide and bright and incredibly close. "You're really something else, Ash Ketchum," she said, her voice dropping, losing its usual aggressive edge. It was soft, almost vulnerable. She leaned in, and for a heart-stopping second, he thought she was going to kiss him. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. The world narrowed to the few inches between their faces, the smell of salt and rain, the heat coming off her skin despite the cold. But she stopped. Her forehead rested against his for a brief moment, a gesture of profound, unspoken connection. It was more intimate than a kiss. It was an acknowledgement. "I see you. You are like me." Then she pulled back, the old, familiar smirk returning to her face, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're still shivering. Don't go getting hypothermia on me, leader." She clapped him hard on the shoulder, the impact friendly but firm, and turned to head back to the hatch. Ash stood there for a moment, his heart hammering against his ribs for a reason that had nothing to do with the fight or the storm. He touched his forehead, the spot where hers had been. He could still feel the warmth. He had gone out seeking a release and had found a connection. A bond forged not in words, but in fire and water. Later that night, the storm still raged, but the ship had found a grudging rhythm, its groans and shudders becoming a familiar, if unsettling, backdrop. Greta was fast asleep in her bunk, utterly spent, a small, contented smile on her face. Anabel was in a deep meditative trance, her breathing even, her mind walled off from the chaos. Ash couldn't sleep. His body ached from the spar, a deep, satisfying soreness, but his mind was wide awake. The moment with Greta played over and over in his head. He was restless again, but for a different reason. He felt a need to check on the others, to ensure the storm wasn't fraying them as much as it had him. He quietly slipped out of the cabin. The ship's internal corridors were dimly lit, the lights flickering with each powerful roll. He made his way toward the main cargo hold. He knew Lucy often went there, as it was the only place large enough for her Milotic to manifest outside its poke ball, even if only for a few moments at a time. He figured she might be there, finding solace in the presence of her Pokémon. The hold was a vast, cavernous space, filled with the dark, looming shapes of shipping containers. The only light came from a few caged safety lamps, casting long, dancing shadows. The air was cold and damp. In a small, clear area at the far end, he found her. She wasn't with her Milotic. She was sitting on an overturned crate, her back to him, her posture ramrod straight. Coiled at her feet was her Seviper. The massive snake Pokemon was agitated, its bladed tail twitching, its head raised, its forked tongue flicking in and out, tasting the turbulent air. Lucy had one hand resting gently on its neck, her thumb stroking its scales in a slow, repetitive motion. She didn't turn as he approached. He had no doubt she had heard him coming. "The storm is upsetting it," she said, her voice a low monotone, barely audible over the groaning of the ship's frame. "It senses the pressure change in the air. The instability. It considers it a threat." Ash stopped a few feet away, not wanting to intrude on the private moment. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the rigid control she was exerting over herself. She was a pillar of calm, not because she didn't feel the chaos, but because she refused to let it master her. Her Seviper was a mirror of her own tightly leashed emotions. "My Pikachu is the same," he said quietly, his voice a respectful distance away. "He hates it when he can't feel solid ground under his feet." Lucy didn't respond. She just continued her slow, rhythmic stroking of Seviper's scales. Ash could have left. He could have offered some empty platitude and retreated to the cabin. But he remembered the look in her eyes during their battle at the battle pike, a deep, profound loneliness hidden behind a mask of cold perfection. She built walls to keep the world out, and everyone respected them, leaving her isolated inside. He decided to try something different. He didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He simply walked over to a nearby crate, a respectful distance away, and sat down, leaning his back against the cold steel. He didn't look at her. He just sat, sharing the space, a silent presence in the vast, dark hold. He was offering not a solution, but solidarity. For a long time, the only sounds were the groaning of the ship and the hiss of the storm outside. He sat there, matching his breathing to the slow rhythm of the waves. He wasn't trying to soothe her or her Pokemon. He was just there. A fixed point in the chaos. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Seviper's agitation began to subside. Its tail stopped its nervous twitching. Its head lowered slightly. It seemed to be responding not to Lucy's touch, but to the change in the atmosphere. The space was no longer just her and her agitated Pokemon against the storm. There was another calm, steady presence in the dark. After what felt like an eternity, Lucy spoke, her voice still low, but the hard, defensive edge was gone. "You are a paradox, Ash Ketchum." He looked over at her. Her face was mostly in shadow, but he could see the glint of her eyes. "How so?" "Greta challenges you with fire, so you meet her with fire. You burn with her. Anabel, she feels the world, and you feel it with her. But I challenge you with ice, with distance. And you do not try to melt it. You do not try to shatter it. You simply sit with it. In the cold. It is an illogical response." "Maybe it's not about finding the right response," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe it's just about being present. You looked like you needed some quiet. So I'm being quiet." Her Seviper let out a low, contented hiss and finally rested its head on the ground near her feet. The tension in Lucy's shoulders visibly eased. She had been holding her breath, and now she let it out in a slow, quiet sigh. She turned her head, looking at him fully for the first time since he had entered the hold. Her eyes, usually so analytical and remote, held a flicker of something else. Curiosity. Maybe even, gratitude. "My father was a collector," she said, her voice soft and distant, as if she were speaking of someone else's life. "Of rare artifacts. Of rare Pokemon. He valued them for their perfection, their power, their beauty. He valued me for the same reasons. For my perfect record. My unblinking gaze. My title as the Pike Queen. He never sat with me in the dark." The admission was a crack in the glacier, a glimpse into the lonely fortress she had built around herself. She had spent her entire life being valued as a thing, a perfect, cold object. An intimidating title. Ash hadn't treated her like the Pike Queen. He hadn't even treated her like a strategist. He had treated her like a person who needed a moment of peace. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He just gave her a small, understanding nod. She stood up, her movements graceful and deliberate. "Thank you, Ash," she said. The words were simple, but coming from her, they felt as heavy as gold. She recalled her sepulchre in a gentle beam of red light and turned to leave the hold. As she passed him, she paused for a brief second. "For what it's worth," she said, not looking at him, "your strategy was not illogical. It was effective." Then she was gone, leaving him alone in the echoing darkness of the cargo hold. He hadn't touched her. They had barely spoken. But he felt as if they had just had the most profound conversation of their lives. He had met her on her own terms, in her own space, and had forged a bond of quiet, mutual respect. A pact sealed in silence. The deepest hours of the night were when the storm was at its most malevolent. The Salus was being tossed about like a child's toy, its every rivet and beam screaming in protest. Ash had finally managed to drift into a light, uneasy sleep, his body wedged into his bunk to keep from being thrown out. He was ripped from it by a scream. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, sharp enough to cut through the roar of the ocean. It was Anabel. He was out of his bunk before he was fully awake, his heart pounding. In the dim light of the cabin, he saw her. She was sitting bolt upright in her bunk, her eyes wide open but unseeing, fixed on a horror only she could perceive. Her whole body was trembling violently, and a faint, sickly purple aura of fear was radiating from her. Greta was already awake, leaning down from the top bunk. "Anabel? What is it? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with alarm. "It's a nightmare," Lucy said, her voice sharp with analysis from across the cabin. "But her psychic energy is out of control. It's more than just a dream." Anabel screamed again, a raw, ragged sound, and clutched her head. "No, please, it's so cold, so empty," she gasped, her words choked with sobs. "He's showing me a world with no color, no sound, no love." Ash knew instantly what it was. This wasn't the storm. This was the null. It was reaching out, taking advantage of the chaos, of her frayed nerves, her open psychic sensitivity. It was a direct assault on the soul of their team. He could feel it now, a sliver of that horrifying emptiness leaking into the room, a tangible cold that had nothing to do with the sea. He saw the face of the husk Trevenant in his mind, its dead eyes. He saw the whisper of Cassion, the herald of silence, promising a peace that was nothing more than a void. He had to stop it. He moved to her bunk, kneeling beside it. "Anabel, it's me. It's Ash. Can you hear me?" She didn't respond. She was trapped, lost in the psychic wasteland the null was forcing upon her. Her breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. The sickly aura around her flickered violently. Greta looked at him, her usual confidence replaced by a rare helplessness. "What do we do?" There was no time for a plan. There was only instinct. Ash closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and did the only thing he could think of. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his aura. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders. He didn't try to fight the cold. He didn't try to erect a barrier. He knew he couldn't overpower a cosmic entity head-on. So he didn't attack. He opened a door. He focused his aura, that warm, living energy inside him, and channeled it into her. But he didn't send it as a wave of power. He sent it as a message. He opened his own mind, his own heart, and poured it into the connection. He sent her a memory. The brilliant, warm sun on the fields of Pallet Town. The smell of his mother's cooking. The feeling of pure, unadulterated joy as he held Pikachu for the first time, a tiny, defiant creature that sparked against his chest. The coldness in the room recoiled, as if burned. Anabel's trembling lessened for a second. He pushed deeper. He sent her the boisterous laughter of Brock, the fiery arguments with Misty that always ended in a smile, the quiet pride of earning his first gym badge. He sent the thrill of his rivalry with Gary, a bond forged in competition and grudging respect. He sent the feeling of every Pokémon he had ever befriended, a vast, complex tapestry of loyalty and love. Then he sent her what he had found on this very ship. The exhilaration of his spar with Greta, the feeling of two equal forces clashing and finding harmony in the chaos. He sent the quiet peace of the cargo hold with Lucy, the profound understanding that could exist in shared silence. He showed her that even in the heart of the storm, there was warmth. There was connection. He wrapped his own soul around her, a shield made not of force, but of love. He showed her a universe that was loud, and chaotic, and painful, and messy, and beautiful. He showed her everything the null was not. Anabel's panicked gasps softened. The violent purple aura around her faded, replaced by a gentle, golden light that emanated from Ash's hands. The oppressive cold in the room vanished, chased away by a palpable warmth. She slumped forward, her consciousness returning, and collapsed against his chest, her body limp with exhaustion. Her sobs were no longer terrified, they were relieved. He held her, his own body trembling from the sheer effort of what he had just done. He had never used his aura like that before, not as a weapon, but as a transfusion of the soul. Greta and Lucy watched, utterly silent, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had witnessed something incredibly private and profoundly powerful. "It's okay," Ash whispered, his voice hoarse, as he held her. "I've got you. You're safe." She looked up at him, her eyes bleary with tears, but clear for the first time. She didn't need to use her telepathy to understand what had just happened. She had been there. She had lived inside his heart for a few moments. She had felt the depth of his bonds, the staggering power of his connections. She had felt his unwavering affection for his friends, for his Pokémon, and for her and Greta and Lucy. "I saw it," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I felt it. All of it." It was the most profound connection she had ever experienced. A pact sealed not with a promise, but with a shared soul. He just held her, a silent guardian against the encroaching night. The storm still raged outside, but inside the small, steel cabin, a different kind of anchor had been set. One forged in the heart of the tempest, binding four disparate souls together against the coming silence. The morning sun broke through the clouds, a brilliant, welcome spear of light. The storm was over. The sea was calm, a vast expanse of sparkling blue. Sinnoh was a faint, dark line on the horizon. The four of them stood on the deck, the air clean and crisp. The ship was battered but whole. So were they. They were exhausted, bruised, and emotionally raw, but they were no longer just a team. They were a unit. The unspoken tensions were gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable understanding. Greta stood beside Ash, her usual aggressive energy softened into a protective presence. Lucy stood on his other side, her composure no longer a wall, but a source of quiet strength for them all. And Anabel stood near him, her gaze clear and steady, her fear replaced by a newfound resolve. They didn't speak of what had happened in the night. They didn't need to. They had made a pact, sealed in combat, in silence, and in soul. A sea salt pact. They were ready for what lay ahead. Chapter 5, The City of Glass Hearts. The first glimpse of Sunnyshore's city should have been a relief. After the claustrophobic confines of the SS Salus and the tense, furtive journey inland, the sight of the city sparkling on the Sinnoh coast was like a promise of light and life. It was a place Ash remembered from his previous journey, a city of dazzling innovation, powered by the sun, its elevated solar panel roads weaving between gleaming white buildings like brilliant yellow ribbons. It was a city that hummed with energy, a testament to a bright, optimistic future. But the city they entered was silent. The hum was gone. The bright, elevated walkways were mostly empty, a few people shuffling along with a listless, aimless gait. The solar roads were gleaming, catching the afternoon sun in a blinding glare, yet the streetlights below were dim, some flickering, others completely dark. The usual cacophony of a bustling metropolis, the chatter of shoppers, the calls of vendors, the cheerful cries of Pokémon, was replaced by a low, ambient quiet that felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. It was the sound of a city holding its breath. They walked the streets, a tight, wary formation. Greta's hands were shoved in her pockets, her shoulders tense, her eyes scanning the quiet citizens with a mixture of confusion and disgust. Lucy walked with her usual poise, but her gaze was sharp, analytical, missing nothing. She noted the Pokémon trailing behind their trainers, not with the usual happy bounce, but with the dull obedience of a well-oiled machine. Anabel had her arms wrapped around herself, a subconscious effort to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. "I don't like this," Greta muttered, her voice a low growl. "It's too quiet. It feels like a graveyard." "Worse," Anabel whispered, her face pale. "A graveyard has echoes. Memories. Grief. This is just empty. It's the same feeling as the woods, but it's not wild and raw. It's curated. Polished." Ash stopped, watching a woman stare blankly at a shop window filled with vibrant Pokémon merchandise. Her partner, a normally cheerful Pachirisu, sat on her shoulder, its striped tail limp, its gaze vacant. There was no spark between them, no shared moment. They were two separate beings occupying the same space, nothing more. "The power grid," Lucy said, pointing up at one of the dim streetlights. "The solar roads are at maximum absorption in this sunlight, yet the city's power output is critically low. The technology isn't failing. It's as if the energy is being collected, but there's no will to distribute it." The pieces began to click into place in Ash's mind. The apathy. The listlessness. The failing power grid. The null didn't just drain life force, it drained will. Ambition. Passion. It was the ultimate entropy, and Sunnyshore, the city of energy, was its perfect target. "We need to find the source," Ash said, his voice grim. He approached a man who was methodically sweeping a pristine patch of sidewalk. "Excuse me," Ash said. The man looked up, his eyes unfocused, his expression placid. "Yes. We're new in town," Ash said. "Things seem a little quiet. Is there some kind of holiday?" "There is peace," the man said, his voice a soft, uninflected monotone. He gestured vaguely toward the center of the city, where the Sunnyshore gym towered over the other buildings. "Cashin has brought us the tranquility. He has unburdened us." "Unburdened you?" Greta interjected, stepping forward. "Unburdened you from what?" The man's gaze drifted to the pokeball on Greta's belt. "From the anxiety of attachment. The pain of expectation. The burden of the bond. He teaches us that true peace comes not from connection, but from serene detachment." He offered them a small, serene smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There is a seminar at the gym this evening. He is a very generous teacher. You should come. You seem agitated." With that, he returned to his sweeping, his movements calm and rhythmic, as if they were the only thing that mattered in the world. Greta stared at him, her mouth agape with disbelief. "The burden of the bond? Did you hear that? He's not just draining them. He's convinced them it's a good thing. He's not a monster hiding in the woods," Lucy deduced, her eyes dark with understanding. "He's a preacher. He's built a philosophy around this emptiness. He's selling it." "Cashin," Ash said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at the flyer the man had gestured to, tacked to a nearby message board. It showed a handsome, smiling man with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. Below his picture, the text read, "Find the tranquility. Unburden your heart. Find true peace with Cashin." A herald of silence, Anabel breathed, the term Scott had used now chillingly real. Looks like we're going to a seminar, Ash said, his jaw tightening. This was no longer just a mission to stop a monster. It was a battle for the very soul of a city. The Sunnyshore's gym had been transformed. The familiar scent of ozone and the crackle of electric-type energy were gone. The battlefield was covered, and the stands were filled not with cheering fans, but with hundreds of people sitting in quiet, rapt attention. The air was still and serene, thick with the cloying scent of incense. It felt like a temple. Ash, Greta, Lucy, and Anabel found seats in the back, their tense energy a stark contrast to the placid calm of the crowd. They were an island of dissonance in a sea of tranquility. On a raised platform where the gym leader should have been, stood Cashin. He was exactly as he appeared on the flyer, charismatic, calm, with a gentle, reassuring voice that washed over the crowd. He spoke not of power or victory, but of pain. We are told that the bond with our Pokémon is the greatest strength a trainer can have, he said, his voice resonating with a deep, empathetic warmth. But I ask you, is it? Or is it our greatest source of suffering? He pointed to a woman in the front row. Tell me, Elara, do you remember when your beloved Growlithe fell ill? The sleepless nights. The fear that clawed at your heart, the constant worry that you would lose him? Was that strength? Or was it a torment born of your attachment? The woman nodded slowly, her eyes welling with tears. It was a torment, she whispered. And you, Marcus, Cashin continued, gesturing to another man. When your Mach-Hoke failed to evolve during the tournament, when you saw the disappointment in his eyes mirroring your own, the crushing weight of that shared failure. Was that the glorious bond you were promised? Or was it a shared cage of expectation? He was a master manipulator, his words plucking at the universal chords of fear, loss, and disappointment that every trainer had ever felt. He wasn't lying. He was just framing the truth in the most poisonous way possible. He's good, Greta hissed, her knuckles white where she gripped the seat. He's twisting everything. He's offering an easy answer to a difficult life, Lucy observed, her face a cold, hard mask. It is a dangerously seductive proposition. I can show you a better way, Cashin proclaimed, his arms opening wide. A path to peace. Not the peace of apathy, but the peace of clarity. A state where you and your Pokémon can exist in mutual respect, free from the turbulent, painful cycle of emotional dependency. A state of pure being. I call it the tranquility. He beckoned a young man onto the stage, a teenager who couldn't have been much older than Ash was when he started his journey. The boy looked nervous, his hands clutching the poke ball of his partner. This is Leo, Cashin said gently. He is afraid. Afraid his Starly isn't strong enough. Afraid of letting it down. Afraid of it being hurt in battle. Let us unburden him. Leo sent out his Starly. The small bird Pokémon looked around nervously. Cashin placed a hand on Leo's shoulder and another on the Starly's head. Anabel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. He's doing it. I can feel it. Cashin closed his eyes. A faint, pale, colorless light emanated from his hands, enveloping both the boy and the Pokémon. It wasn't a violent energy, it was a cold, precise, surgical light. It lasted only a second. When it faded, Leo's nervous expression was gone, replaced by a placid calm. The Starly chirped, but it was a rote, mechanical sound, devoid of its usual cheerful energy. The boy and the bird looked at each other, and there was nothing there. No fear, no love, no expectation. Just acknowledgement. The bond, that vibrant, chaotic, invisible thread, had been snipped. How do you feel, Leo? Cashin asked. Quiet, the boy said, his voice flat. I feel quiet. He looked at his Starly. I'm not worried about him anymore. Thank you for showing us the way, Cashin, he said, then walked off the stage, his Starly trotting obediently behind him. The crowd murmured in approval, their placid faces showing flickers of desire for the same peace. Anabel felt physically ill. The psychic backlash of witnessing that severance, that deliberate creation of a void, was like watching a soul being murdered. Greta was shaking with a rage so profound it was silent. This was a desecration of everything she believed in, everything she fought for. Ash couldn't stay silent any longer. He stood up. His movement was a sudden, sharp disruption in the room's serene atmosphere. Hundreds of placid faces turned to look at him. "You call that peace?" Ash's voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the quiet. "That's not peace. That's emptiness. You're not unburdening them. You're robbing them." Cassian turned, his gentle smile never wavering, though a new, sharp light entered his eyes. He had found the dissenter. Ah, a passionate one. "Welcome. You believe the burden is worth carrying?" "It's not a burden." Ash shot back, taking a step into the aisle, drawing the attention of the entire room. "It's what makes us alive." That worry Alara felt for her grow lithe. "That's called love." That disappointment Marcus felt. "It's what pushes him and his Machoke to get stronger, together." "You're not taking away their pain. You're taking away their ability to feel anything at all." He pointed at the stage. "You didn't free that boy. You hollowed him out. You turned his partner into a tool. A relationship with a Pokemon isn't supposed to be quiet and easy. It's supposed to be loud, and messy, and difficult, and beautiful. It's about fighting with them, and celebrating with them, and sometimes, it's about being afraid for them. That's what a bond is." A flicker of genuine anger crossed Cassian's face, quickly suppressed. "A very romantic notion. But naive. You speak of beauty, but I see only a cycle of suffering. You cling to your pain as if it were a treasure." He descended from the stage, walking down the aisle toward Ash, a king moving through his court. Two of his followers, their faces as placid as all the others, moved to stand behind him. They were his acolytes, his chief disciples. "You believe your way is stronger?" Cassian challenged, his voice dropping, taking on a dangerous edge. "Then let us put it to the test. Let us show these good people which path offers true strength. The path of frantic, painful attachment, or the path of serene, focused power." He snapped his fingers. The acolytes behind him each threw a pokeball. A massive, four-armed Machamp and a sleek, deadly Sizer materialized, their eyes as dull and vacant as the husk Trevenants had been. They were husks. Greta, Lucy, and Anabel were on their feet in an instant, moving to stand with Ash. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath, and scrambled back, clearing the floor of the arena. The seminar had become a battlefield. "This will be a 4-on-4 exhibition," Cassian announced to the audience. "Observe closely." He released his own Pokemon. A Metagross, its metallic body gleaming under the dim lights, its 4 brains making it a psychic and strategic supercomputer. But its red eye was not filled with intelligent light. It was a dead, cold crimson. Ash looked at his team. Greta's eyes were burning with righteous fury. Lucy's face was a mask of cold fury. Anabel was pale but her jaw was set with determination. "Pikachu, I choose you!" Ash yelled. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder, landing on the battlefield, his cheeks already sparking. "Hariyama, it's time to crush them!" Greta roared, releasing her powerhouse. "Sevapur, let's show them true focus," Lucy commanded, her voice like ice. "Alakazam, we need your mind," Anabel said, her own Alakazam appearing in a flash of light, its spoons held at the ready. The stage was set. A battle of ideologies, fought with Pokemon. "Machamp, close combat on the Hariyama," one acolyte ordered tonelessly. "Greta, counter it." Ash yelled. "Hariyama, use Force Palm." Greta roared. The two fighting titans charged each other. Hariyama's palm glowed with energy, but as it got close, the Macamp didn't flinch, didn't try to dodge, didn't show any of the usual pre-impact tells. It just plowed forward, taking the force palm on its chest with a dull thud, and unleashed a furious, machine-like torrent of blows. Hariyama, caught off guard by the sheer lack of self-preservation, was driven back, grunting in pain and confusion. "It's not reacting," Greta yelled, stunned. "It just took the hit." At the same time, Lucy was facing the Sizer. "Sevapur, use glare." Sevapur's eyes glowed with a terrifying light, a move meant to paralyze an opponent with fear. The Sizer didn't even register it. It just continued its advance, its metal claws snapping. "It's no good, Lucy," Ash shouted. "They can't be intimidated. They don't feel fear." Anabel, meanwhile, was trying to support them. "Alakazam, use Psychic on the Macamp. Stop its assault." Alakazam's eyes glowed, and it focused its immense mental power. But as the psychic energy hit the Macamp, Anabel cried out and stumbled, clutching her head. "Ah! There's nothing there. It's like touching a black hole. The feedback, it's pure static." This was the strategic nightmare. Their greatest strengths were rendered useless. Greta's ability to read and break an opponent's fighting spirit was worthless against an opponent with no spirit. Lucy's strategies, which relied on predicting reactions and exploiting emotions, were failing against opponents that had none. Anabel's psychic connection, her greatest gift, was now a crippling vulnerability. They were being systematically dismantled. The Husk Pokémon fought with a cold, terrifying efficiency. They didn't waste energy on feints or roars. They just executed commands, absorbed damage that would make any normal Pokémon flinch, and dealt it back with brutal, robotic precision. Cashin watched, a serene smile on his face. "You see," he called out to the crowd. "Your attachments make you weak, unpredictable. The tranquility brings focus. Purity of purpose." Ash's mind was racing, processing the chaos, the failure of their tactics. They couldn't fight this way. They had to change the rules. He looked at the strained faces of his team, the confusion in their Pokémon's eyes. He needed to be the leader. He needed to be the center. He closed his eyes for a split second, and a new command structure bloomed in his mind, born of desperation and the absolute trust he had in his team. "Greta!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the noise with absolute authority. "Stop trying to outfight it. You're not in a dojo. It's a machine. Break it. Hariyama, forget honor, forget form. Grab its leg and don't let go. Disable it." Greta's eyes widened. It went against every martial arts instinct she had. But she saw the desperate logic in Ash's command. "Hariyama, you heard him. Grab it. Arm thrust to the knee joint." Hariyama changed its stance, no longer a proud sumo wrestler, but a grappler. It weathered another series of blows and lunged, its massive hands locking onto the Machamp's leg. The Husk Pokémon tried to punch it, but Hariyama held on, driving its other hand repeatedly into the Machamp's knee. It was ugly, brutal, and effective. The Machamp's leg buckled. "Lucy!" Ash shouted next. "Stop trying to predict the Pokémon. They're puppets. Predict him." He pointed at the acolyte. "He's the one giving the orders. What's his most logical move when his Sizer is being double-teamed by Pikachu? He'll recall it or order a defensive move. Bait the trainer, not the Pokémon." Lucy's eyes lit up with understanding. It was a complete paradigm shift. She was no longer playing chess against the pieces, she was playing against the player. "Pikachu, Thunderbolt on the Sizer. Sevapur, use Poison Tail, but aim for the space between them. Cut off its retreat." It worked. The acolyte, seeing the double threat, instinctively went to recall his Sizer. But Sevapur's venomous tail was already sweeping through the air, forcing the Sizer to leap back, directly into the path of Pikachu's full-power thunderbolt. The Scizor convulsed and crashed to the ground, twitching. Anabel. Ash's voice was softer, but just as firm. Stop trying to read them. It's killing you. Connect to us. Be our switchboard. Link our minds. Tell me what Greta needs before she knows she needs it. Tell Lucy where I'm moving. You're not a fighter right now, you're our nervous system. Anabel looked at him, her eyes wide. Use her empathy not as a weapon against the enemy, but as a bond for her team. It was the lesson he had taught her in the storm, now applied to the battlefield. She nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. She closed her eyes. Her alakazam put up a protect barrier around them both. Instantly, Ash felt it. A warm, clear connection opened in his mind. It wasn't telepathy in words. It was a flow of pure intent. He could feel Greta's rising fury and her Hariyama's grim determination. He could feel Lucy's cold, sharp tactical analysis as she anticipated the next command. And they could feel him. It was time to face the master. Pikachu, we're taking on the Metagross, Ash said, his voice calm. Cashin smirked. A foolish choice. Your bond is your greatest weakness, Ash. Metagross, use Psychic. The massive steel Pokémon's eye glowed, and an immense wave of psychic power surged toward Pikachu. Ash didn't shout a command. He didn't have to. Through the network Anabel had created, he sent a single, clear thought to Pikachu, down and to the left. Then Iron Tail, aim for the leg joint. Now. Pikachu moved a fraction of a second before the psychic attack even fully manifested, dodging it with impossible speed. He sprinted forward, his tail glowing with a metallic sheen, and slammed it into the joint where Metagross's leg connected to its body. It was a move of perfect, silent synchronicity, faster than any verbal command could ever be. Cashin's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of utter shock. What? How? Metagross staggered, its psychic assault broken. Now, Pikachu. Volt tackle. Full power. Ash projected, not as a command, but as a shared feeling of absolute, unshakable conviction. He poured his own aura, his own will to win, into that thought. Pikachu became a golden comet. He rocketed across the floor, cloaked in an incandescent shroud of lightning. He struck the off-balance Metagross dead center. The explosion of energy was deafening. When the light faded, Metagross lay in a heap, its metal body scorched, its red eye dark. Defeated. The hall was utterly silent. The serene followers stared, their placid expressions finally cracking with confusion. Their prophet of peace through detachment had been defeated by the very thing he preached against, a bond so powerful it transcended speech. The illusion was shattered. Cashin stared at his defeated Metagross, then at Ash, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred on his face. He had lost. Not just the battle, but the war for the city's heart. He had been exposed as a fraud. This isn't over, he hissed. With a swift motion, he threw down a smoke pellet. The gym filled with thick, black smoke. When it cleared, Cashin and his two acolytes were gone. They had left their Pokémon. And their followers. The husks, their commands broken, simply stood still, like statues. The people in the crowd looked around, as if waking from a long dream, their faces a canvas of confusion and a dawning, terrible emptiness. They looked at their own Pokémon, and for the first time, felt the hollow space where their bond used to be. A woman began to sob, a heart-wrenching sound in the quiet room. Suddenly, the main doors of the gym burst open. Faulkner, the real Sunnyshore's gym leader, stood there, flanked by a few city officials. He looked haggard, his eyes unfocused, but the raw energy of the battle seemed to have shaken him from his apathy. He stared at the crying woman, at the vacant-eyed trainers, at the still, husk Pokémon. He looked at Ash and his team, standing exhausted but victorious in the center of it all. The horror of what he had allowed to happen in his own city, in his own gym, dawned on his face. What have I done?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Ash looked at the faces in the crowd, the glass hearts left behind by Cashin. They had won the battle, but the casualties were everywhere. They couldn't just snip a thread and fix this. The damage was done. This victory felt heavy, tragic. Later, Faulkner, now fully lucid and filled with a burning shame, offered them the full resources of the city. A place to rest, to recover. It was a small gesture, but it was significant. A piece of the establishment was now their ally. As dusk fell, the four of them stood on the coastal road leading out of Sunnyshoar, looking back at the city. The lights were a little brighter now, a few more than before, a testament to the will they had reignited. But it was a small victory in a sea of loss. "We can't fix them, can we?" Anabel asked softly, her voice heavy with the sorrow she felt radiating from the city. "No," Lucy said, her voice quiet. "A bond, once truly severed, cannot simply be retied. Cashin didn't just put them to sleep. He performed an amputation of the soul." Greta slammed a fist into her palm. "When I find him again, I'm going to," her voice trailed off. Even she knew that punching Cashin wouldn't heal the people he'd broken. Ash watched the city, the weight of their partial victory heavy on his shoulders. They had driven out the darkness, but they couldn't erase the scars it had left behind. Their enemy wasn't just a monster to be defeated. It was an idea. A poison. And it had left a city full of broken hearts in its wake. Their war was no longer an abstract concept. It now had a face, and it had victims. And they all knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that this was only the beginning. Chapter 6, The Queen's Gambit. The silence in Faulkner's private penthouse apartment was a different kind from the one that had suffocated his city. This silence was a fragile truce, a shared breath held in the aftermath of a battle that had left no visible rubble, only fractured souls. The apartment was a monument to modernist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, God's-eye view of Sunnyshoar, a city now struggling to flicker back to life. Polished chrome and stark white furniture created an environment as sterile and controlled as a laboratory. It was a space Lucy should have found calming. Instead, it felt like a cage. For 2 days, they had rested, recovering under the watchful, guilt-ridden eye of the Sunnyshoar gym leader. Faulkner had given them carte blanche, his shame a palpable force that drove him to provide them with anything they needed. Food, supplies, and most importantly, privacy. But the privacy was a double-edged sword. It gave them time to think, and thinking was a dangerous pastime. Greta had thrown herself into a brutal training regimen, spending hours in Faulkner's private gym, the sound of her Hariyama's blows against reinforced steel walls a constant, rhythmic expression of her rage. Anabel was quiet and withdrawn, meditating for long stretches, trying to cleanse the psychic static of the battle from her mind. Ash was the restless center, patching them all together. He'd spar with Greta until they were both bruised and breathless, sit in silent companionship with Anabel, and pore over regional maps, trying to anticipate their enemy's next move. And then there was Lucy. She had claimed a corner of the main living area, a sleek white table and a minimalist chair, her new throne. She had covered the surface with data slates, topographical maps of Sinnoh, and complex charts she'd created herself. She was analyzing. Cross-referencing Scott's intelligence on energy fluctuations with migratory patterns of psychic-type Pokémon, shipping lanes, and even geological fault lines. She was trying to build a predictive model, a logical framework to hunt a monster that defied logic. It was her armor, her defense mechanism. To understand a thing was to control it. Ash approached her corner, a mug of steaming tea in each hand. She didn't look up, her eyes flicking across a scrolling list of data points on a slate, her focus absolute. He placed one of the mugs on a clear corner of her table. "You've been at this for 6 hours," he said, his voice quiet. "You need a break." "Breaks are inefficiencies," she replied without missing a beat, her finger tracing a line on the digital map. Cashin is not taking a break. He has proven to be an intelligent, adaptive adversary. His last known heading from Sunnyshoar was northwest, towards Canalave City. But that is the logical path. Cashin, for all his rhetoric about peace, thrives on chaos. A direct route is too predictable. Maybe, Ash said, leaning against the back of a nearby sofa. Or maybe he's just running. He is not running, Lucy stated, a chilling certainty in her voice. She finally looked up from her slate, her gray eyes sharp and intense. He is regrouping. And he is retaliating. We humiliated him. We dismantled his philosophy in front of his congregation. An individual like Cashin, whose entire power base is built on an image of infallible serenity and control, will not tolerate such a slight. He will strike back. The only question is how, and where. Ash watched her, seeing the familiar walls of the Pike Queen firmly back in place. The vulnerability he'd seen on the ship, the crack in the glacier, had been sealed over with a fresh layer of ice. She was all strategy, all logic. He wondered if it was for her own benefit, or for theirs. A way to prove her value after Anabel's psychic power and Greta's raw strength had proven so vulnerable. You're trying to carry all the strategy yourself, Lucy, he said gently. You don't have to. We're a team. Her gaze flickered for a fraction of a second. I am a strategist. That is my function on this team. Anabel is the heart, Greta is the fist, you are the will. I am the mind. I am performing my function. The word stung. Function. It was the same cold, utilitarian language her father might have used. The language Cashin had used to describe his hollowed-out followers. Before he could respond, a high-pitched ping emanated from one of her data slates. Her eyes snapped back to the screen, her focus immediate. What is it? Ash asked, stepping closer. An anomaly, she breathed, her fingers flying across the screen, bringing up new windows of data. Scott just patched through a priority alert. A new energy signature has appeared. It's wrong. She projected the data into the air between them, a swirling, chaotic vortex of numbers and symbols. Ash couldn't make sense of it, but he could see the alarm on Lucy's face. It has the energetic markers of a null event, she explained, her voice quick and clipped. The same psychic void. But it's unstable. It's appearing and disappearing in rapid, irregular intervals. And the locations, they're not random. She brought up a map of Sinnoh. 5 points of light were blinking erratically, scattered across the coastline northwest of their position. They form a perfect pentagram. A geometrically precise pattern. It's deliberate. It's too neat. It's a trap, Ash said instantly. Obviously, Lucy confirmed, a flicker of appreciation in her eyes for his quick uptake. But it is also a message. A pentagram, it's a symbol of ritual. Of power. He's baiting us. But the pattern is also a puzzle. Why reveal his hand in such an overt manner? He is broadcasting his position, daring us to come. He wants us to see this as a crude, obvious trap, to dismiss it. But it's a feint. The true trap is not the location, but the puzzle itself. Her mind was already working, dissecting the layers of deception. She was like a houndoom that had caught a scent. This was a challenge tailored for her, a complex strategic problem that begged to be solved. I need to get a direct reading, she said, already standing, her mind made up. The interference in the city is too great. I need a clean line of sight from the coast, equidistant from the 2 nearest points of the pattern. From there, I can triangulate the source of the signal and discern the nature of the illusion. You're not going alone, Ash said, his voice firm. I have to, she countered, her tone leaving no room for argument. A group is too conspicuous. It would spring the trap prematurely. I will be in and out in under an hour. Observation only. I am not a fool, Ash. I will not engage. I will gather the data we need to plan our actual counterattack. She was so confident, so assured in her own peerless logic. She saw the board, saw the trap, and believed she could analyze it without stepping on it. It was the same cold arrogance that had made her the Pike Queen. Before Ash could protest further, Greta and Anabel entered the room, drawn by the urgent tone of their conversation. "What's going on?" Greta asked, wiping sweat from her brow with a towel. Lucy quickly and efficiently explained the situation, her argument a fortress of irrefutable logic. A solo reconnaissance mission was the only tactical option. To do otherwise would be to play directly into Cashin's hands. "She's right," Greta said reluctantly, hating to admit it. "Charging in is what he'd expect from me. A small, quiet footprint is smarter." Anabel looked worried. "I can't get a psychic read on it. The whole area feels muffled. Like it's wrapped in cotton. It's a psychic dead zone." "Exactly," Lucy said, taking Anabel's observation as further proof of her theory. "It's an artificial dead zone, designed to blind our most powerful asset. He is forcing us to rely on pure logic." My logic. There was no arguing with her. She had framed it in such a way that to stop her would be to doubt her function, her very purpose on the team. Ash looked at her, at the unwavering resolve in her eyes, and felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He was letting the Queen walk into a gambit designed specifically for her. "1 hour," Ash said, his voice low and serious. "You have 1 hour. If you're not back, we're coming for you. No matter what the trap is." A flicker of something, surprise, gratitude, crossed her face before it was replaced by her usual mask of cool professionalism. "An acceptable contingency. I will be back before you've finished your tea." With a final, sharp nod, she was gone, a silent shadow slipping out of the penthouse and into the recovering city. The chamber was a perfect cube of white. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all were a seamless, sterile, light-emitting surface that bathed the space in a shadowless, uniform glow. There was no sound. Not the hum of machinery, not the rush of air, not even the echo of her own breathing. It was a void of sensory input. In the exact center of the room sat a single, elegant chair of black metal. Lucy stood just inside the entrance, the heavy steel door having hissed shut behind her with a terrifying finality. The trap hadn't been a physical one. It had been an intellectual one. The puzzle of the pentagram had been a decoy, a complex set of false data streams that had led her on a wild goose chase, deeper and deeper into a logical rabbit hole, until she was isolated, miles from the city, in an abandoned weather station on a cliff overlooking the sea. Then, the null field generators had activated, the door had slammed, and the floor had descended. She had been so focused on the puzzle, she had failed to properly analyze her surroundings. A rookie mistake. An emotional mistake. Her frustration with Cashin had made her eager. Her pride had made her blind. "Welcome, Pike Queen." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a calm, resonant baritone amplified by hidden speakers. It was Cashin. "I trust the accommodations are to your liking," he continued. "I had them designed with you in mind. No chaos. No mess. No distracting, sentimental clutter. Just pure, clean, logical space." Lucy's heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, illogical drumbeat in the perfect silence. She forced it down, her training kicking in. She smoothed her expression into a mask of bored indifference and walked calmly to the center of the room. She did not sit. "A bit melodramatic, don't you think, Cashin?" she said, her voice betraying none of her fear. "If you wanted a conversation, you could have just called." A low chuckle echoed through the room. "But I didn't want a conversation. I wanted a demonstration. You are the most interesting piece on the board, Lucy. A mind of pure, crystalline logic, trapped in a world of messy, inconvenient emotions. I've come to offer you an escape. I'm not interested in your empty philosophy," she stated flatly. Are you not? The voice pressed, gentle and insistent. I've studied you. I know about your father. The collector. The man who valued you like a rare, flawless gem. Cold. Perfect. Unfeeling. He taught you that your worth was in your perfection, your control. And so you built a fortress around yourself, and you called it the battle pike. Lucy flinched. The verbal blow was as physical as one of Greta's punches. He had done his research. This wasn't a random attack. It was a targeted assassination of her soul. And now you find yourself with them, Cashin's voice continued, laced with a synthetic pity. The boy with the bleeding heart. The wild animal in human skin. The weeping empath. And they need you, don't they? They need your mind to make sense of the chaos they create. They need your coldness to temper their fire. You are a tool to them, Lucy. A very, very useful tool. Just as you were to your father. You're wrong, she said, her voice a little too tight. Am I? Does Greta understand your need for order? Does she see your silence as anything other than disapproval? Does Ash, for all his talk of bonds, truly see you? Or does he just see the Pike Queen, the brilliant strategist who can help him win his little war? He sat with you in the dark on that ship, a calculated move to gain your loyalty. He saw a problem, and he applied a solution. It was a strategic act, Lucy, not a personal one. Every word was a carefully crafted poison, designed to reinforce her deepest, most secret fears. That she was unlovable. That she was only valued for her utility. That her cold exterior was a barrier no one truly wanted to cross, only to use. They are my team, she said, the words feeling thin and hollow in the dead air. They are your burden, Cashin corrected softly. You spend your days cleaning up their emotional messes, charting a course through their impulsive decisions. You are a queen, forced to serve pawns. But I offer you a different role. An equal partnership. Join me. Together, our minds, unburdened by the static of emotion, can bring a true, lasting order to this chaotic world. A beautiful, silent peace. You will not have to pretend to feel. You will not have to tolerate their noise. You will be celebrated for your perfect, logical clarity. You will finally be understood. He was offering her everything she had ever secretly craved, acceptance for who she was, a world that made sense, a purpose that was clean and pure. He was offering her an end to the loneliness. She sank into the chair, the strength leaving her legs. She stared at her hands, at the faint tremor she could not control. Was he right? Was her connection to the team just another function she was performing? Was the warmth she felt from Ash just a pleasant side effect of his need for her skills? The silence stretched on, and in that silence, her own doubts became her torturers. An hour and 20 minutes, Greta snarled, pacing the length of the penthouse like a caged tiger. She said an hour. Something's wrong. Ash stood at the window, staring out at the coastline, his fists clenched. He'd been replaying his last conversation with Lucy over and over in his head. He had let her go. He had trusted her logic over his own gut feeling, and now she was gone. I can't reach her, Anabel said, her voice strained. She was sitting on the floor, her eyes closed in concentration, alakazam floating beside her. The psychic dead zone she mentioned, it solidified. It's like a wall of lead. I can't get anything in or out. I can't feel her at all. Then we go in blind, Greta declared, grabbing her jacket. I don't care what the trap is. We smash it to pieces and we get her back. No, Ash said, turning from the window. That's what he wants. He's separated us. If we charge in, angry and disorganized, he'll pick us apart. He's counting on us to be emotional. So what? We just sit here. Greta yelled, her frustration boiling over. No, Ash said again, his voice dropping, his focus turning inward. We don't use our emotions. We use mine. He sat down on the floor, crossing his legs, mimicking Anabel's meditative pose. He closed his eyes. What are you doing? Greta demanded. Anabel can't find her because Cashin is blocking psychic energy, Ash explained, his voice calm and steady. He's creating a wall of static. But he's not just blocking energy. He's creating a void. An absence. Lucy is a part of our team now. Her presence, her fierce, controlled spirit, it's a note in the chord. Anabel can't hear the note. But maybe I can feel the silence where it's supposed to be. He took a deep breath and reached out with his aura. It was different from how he'd used it before. He wasn't pushing it out as a weapon or a shield. He was unfurling it, spreading it thin, like a vast, sensitive net. He let it wash over the city, over the coastline, feeling the thrum of life, the energy of every person and Pokemon. It was a symphony of a million tiny lights. He ignored the lights. He looked for the dark. He searched for the hole. The one place where a bright, cold, fiercely intelligent light should be, but wasn't. It was excruciating. The mental strain was immense. It was like trying to hear a pin drop in the middle of a rock concert by listening for the absence of sound. His head began to throb. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Ash, don't. Anabel said, her eyes snapping open, sensing the strain he was under. You could burn yourself out. Your aura isn't designed for this. Help me, he grunted, the words forced out through clenched teeth. Don't try to find her. Just, focus my search. Be a lens. Help me filter out the noise. Anabel hesitated for only a second before nodding. She placed her hands on his shoulders. Her own gentle psychic energy flowed into him, not to search, but to soothe, to clarify. She acted as a filter, helping him push past the overwhelming static of a million lives, helping him focus on that one, specific, missing piece. Greta watched, her anger giving way to a stunned awe. She couldn't see the energy, but she could feel the atmosphere in the room change, growing tense and heavy, all of it centered on Ash. Deeper and deeper he pushed his senses. Past the city. Over the churning ocean. Along the rocky coast. And then, he found it. It wasn't a wall. It wasn't a signal. It was a vacuum. A perfect, soul-crushingly empty spot in the fabric of the world. A tiny, localized patch of the null's signature silence. And at its heart, a flickering, faint, and terrified ember of a spirit he knew as well as his own. He gasped, his eyes flying open. They were red-rimmed with strain. A trickle of blood ran from his nose. I've got her, he breathed. He pointed a trembling finger out the window, towards a desolate, windswept cliff miles up the coast. She's there. The white room was beginning to feel like a coffin. Lucy sat in a chair, her head in her hands. Cashin's voice had fallen silent, letting his words fester in the quiet. He had offered her a world of perfect order, a world without the pain of her past or the chaos of her present. A world where she would finally belong. It was so tempting. The heavy steel door at the far end of the room exploded inward. The blast was deafening, a brutal violation of the pristine silence. The door, torn from its hinges, flew across the room and embedded itself in the opposite wall with a sickening crunch. Through the smoke and dust stood a furious silhouette. Greta's Hariyama, its body glowing with the residual energy of a focus punch. Behind it stood Greta herself, her eyes burning with a protective fire that was hotter than any sun. To her side, Anabel and her Alakazam stood ready, a psychic shield shimmering around them. And in the center, walking through the breach with a calm, terrifying purpose, was Ash. His face was pale and streaked with dust, but his eyes were locked on her, and in them was a hurricane of emotion, worry, relief, and an anger so profound it was completely silent. Pikachu was on his shoulder, his entire body crackling with contained electrical fury. Cashin's voice returned, tinged with a faint annoyance. so predictable. The emotional, brutish response. You see, Lucy. This is the chaos you must endure. Ash ignored the voice. He walked across the room, his boots crunching on debris, and stopped in front of her chair. He knelt down, bringing himself to her level. He didn't reach for her. He just looked at her, his gaze cutting through the fog of her confusion. He's wrong, Lucy, Ash said, his voice low and raw with emotion. I don't need the Pike Queen. I don't need a strategist. I don't need a tool. He took a breath, his gaze unwavering. We need Lucy. He reached out and gently took her hand. His hand was warm and calloused, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile room. I didn't sit with you in the dark on that ship because it was a strategy. I did it because you looked lonely. And I know what that feels like. Her breath hitched. His words were a simple, unadorned truth, and they shattered Cashin's carefully constructed labyrinth of lies. He hadn't seen a problem to be solved. He had seen a person who was hurting. He saw her. You think your mind is all you are, Ash continued, his voice fierce with conviction. But your strength isn't just your logic. It's the passion you hide behind it. It's the loyalty you show to your Pokémon. It's the courage it takes to stand alone against the world. Don't let him take that from you. Don't let him turn you into one of them. Tears welled in Lucy's eyes, hot and unfamiliar. The ice around her heart didn't just crack, it melted, washed away by a flood of pure, unadulterated acceptance. She wasn't a tool. She wasn't just a function. She was a part of this chaotic, messy, wonderful team. She was wanted. She squeezed his hand, a silent answer. She stood up, her posture changing. The frightened, doubtful woman was gone. In her place stood the queen, but not the Pike Queen of the battle frontier. This was a new queen, a queen who had chosen her people. Her gaze, now clear and sharp as a diamond, swept the room. Cashin, she said, her voice ringing with a cold, precise fury that made the air itself seem to thin. You made a critical error in your calculations. You assumed my emotions were a weakness. You are about to learn that they are my greatest weapon. On a monitor in a hidden control room, Cashin watched her face, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of something he had long since abandoned, fear. He had miscalculated. Horribly. Destroy them, he commanded into his microphone. Panels in the walls slid open, and 4 Pokémon appeared, a hulking Rhyperior, a swift Aerodactyl, a powerful Magmortar, and a cunning Spiritome. All of them were husks, their eyes dead and empty. Greta, the Rhyperior is yours, Lucy commanded, her voice the sharp, clear note of a general on the battlefield. Ash, Pikachu, take the Aerodactyl. Anabel, your Alakazam's Protect is our only defense against the Spiritome's tricks. Hold it. The Magmortar is mine. She released her Pokémon. Not just Seviper, but Milotic as well. The beautiful sea serpent materialized in a shower of light, its presence a stark contrast to the sterile room. It let out a cry that was not just a sound, but a wave of calming, restorative energy, washing over her allies. Milotic, use Icy Wind. Not as an attack. A field effect. Change the terrain, Lucy ordered. Milotic unleashed a blast of frigid air that coated the entire floor in a treacherous sheet of ice. The lumbering Rhyperior's feet slid out from under it, its massive weight becoming a liability. Now, Greta. Hariyama, rock smash on its grounded legs. Greta roared, seizing the advantage. Lucy's attention was on her own battle. The Husk Magmortar unleashed a massive flamethrower. Seviper, use Dig. Seviper vanished into the concrete floor, the flames washing harmlessly over the spot. Milotic, Brine, directly on Magmortar's feet. The superheated water struck the ice-coated floor around the Magmortar, creating a massive cloud of scalding steam, completely obscuring it. The Magmortar fired blindly into the cloud. It's disoriented, Lucy stated. Sevapur, now. Emerge behind it. Poison fawn. Sevapur erupted from the floor behind the blinded mag mortar, its fangs glowing with a toxic purple light, and sank them deep into the husk's back. It was a masterclass in battlefield control. She wasn't just fighting, she was conducting a symphony of destruction. Her cold logic, now fueled by a righteous, protective fury, had become something terrifyingly potent. She was using her team's strengths, mitigating their weaknesses, and controlling the flow of the entire battle with the flawless precision of a grandmaster. Within minutes, it was over. The Husk Pokémon lay defeated, their empty shells broken. The Queen's gambit had been played, but it was Lucy's, not Cashin's. She had sacrificed her armor of solitude and, in doing so, had won everything. The voice was gone. Cashin had fled. They stood together in the ruined white room, breathing heavily in the sudden silence. Greta clapped a stunned but grinning hand on Lucy's shoulder. Anabel was smiling through tears of relief. Ash just looked at her, a proud, tired smile on his face. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she smiled back. A real smile. It was small, and a little uncertain, but it was genuine, and it transformed her entire face. Thank you, she said, the words simple, yet holding the weight of her entire world. He just nodded. Welcome to the team, Lucy. She was still the mind. But now, she was also a part of its heart. And they were stronger for it than they had ever been before. Chapter 7, The Crown of the World. The air in Faulkner's penthouse, once a sterile sanctuary, had become a pressure cooker. 2 days had passed since they'd pulled Lucy from Cashin's clutches, 2 days in which the world outside had begun to unravel. The initial reports were disjointed, dismissed as mass hysteria or technical malfunctions. A town in rural Johto where every citizen simultaneously fell silent for an hour. A fleet of fishing boats off the coast of Unova found drifting, their crews staring blankly at the horizon. Patches of unexplained blight were appearing in forests and fields across the globe, growing with an unnatural speed. The static Scott had warned them about was no longer a whisper, it was a rising tide of noise, jamming the frequencies of life itself. They were watching a news feed projected onto the penthouse's far wall. A shaken reporter stood in Celadon City, her voice trembling as she described the apathy plague, a phenomenon where trainers' Pokémon were suddenly refusing to battle, their eyes growing dull and listless. The Pokémon League was issuing statements about a fast-acting virus and urging calm, but the facade was cracking. The world was scared. They're losing control, Greta said, her voice a low growl. She was restlessly pacing the length of the room, her fists clenching and unclenching. The League is trying to patch a hole in a dam with paper tape. They are reacting to symptoms, not the cause, Lucy agreed, her gaze fixed on the screen, her face a mask of cold analysis. She had recovered from her ordeal with Cashin, her composure restored, but there was a new, harder edge to her logic, a protective fury simmering just beneath the surface. They are fighting 1,000 disparate fires, unaware they all stem from a single, deliberate act of arson. Ash stood by the window, looking not at the news, but at the sky. The sun was a pale, watery disk, its light lacking warmth, as if seen through a film of gray dust. The vibrant blue of the Sinnoh sky had faded to a washed-out, desaturated slate. It's getting worse, he said quietly. Faster. As if on cue, Anabel, who had been meditating in a corner of the room, let out a sharp, pained gasp. She swayed, and Ash was at her side in an instant, steadying her. Her skin was cold, her face ashen. Anabel. What is it? He asked, his voice laced with concern. It's a wave, she whispered, her eyes squeezed shut in pain. A psychic pressure wave. It's coming from the north. It's so heavy. She leaned against him, her body trembling. It doesn't feel like Cashin's anger. It's not an attack. It's a broadcast. A signal. It feels like finality. Like a clock striking midnight. The lights in the penthouse flickered violently and went out, plunging the room into the dim, gray twilight of the dying afternoon. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, casting the room in a stark, crimson glow. Outside, a low, mournful siren began to wail from the city below. The null, Lucy breathed, her eyes wide with dawning horror as she cross-referenced the energy readings flooding in from Scott's network. It's not just spreading anymore. It's gathering. All the energy it has drained, all the apathy, all the severed bonds, it's being pulled to a single focal point. She brought up a map of Sinnoh. A single, pulsing point of malevolent, colorless light was shining at the very center of the region. At the peak of a mountain. Mount Coronet, Ash said, his voice grim. Spear Pillar. The crown of the world, Anabel whispered, her eyes still closed. The place where the veil between dimensions is thinnest. It's found its anchor. It's preparing to manifest. The implications were catastrophic. If the null could create a permanent, physical anchor in their world, it would no longer be a creeping silence. It would be a singularity, a black hole of the soul that would expand, turning the entire Sinnoh region into a barren, lifeless husk in a matter of hours, a chain reaction that would then engulf the world. This was it. The endgame. As the reality of their situation crashed down on them, the sound of powerful wing beats roared outside the window. A blast of wind buffeted the glass. They turned to see two immense draconic shapes descending onto the penthouse's wide balcony. One was Lance's Dragonite, its orange scales looking dull in the gray light. The other was a creature of terrifying power and grace, a Garchomp, its shark-like body a perfect engine of destruction. Standing beside it was a woman with long, blonde hair, her expression as serious and unyielding as the mountain they had just named. Cynthia. The champion of Sinnoh. And with her was a humbled, grim-faced Lance. The glass door slid open, and the two champions stepped inside, their presence filling the room with an almost unbearable pressure. "We heard the news," Lance said, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance, replaced by a weary gravity. He looked at Ash, his gaze direct and filled with a grudging respect. "My methods of containment have failed. The League is in chaos." "You were right." Cynthia's gaze swept over the team, her intelligent eyes lingering on each of them before settling on Ash. She had the air of a scholar and a warrior, a woman who understood the history of the world and was not afraid to fight for its future. "What Anabel is feeling, my own psychics have confirmed," she said, her voice calm but resonant with authority. "A convergence of negative psychic energy at Spear Pillar, on a scale that defies all known phenomena. We believe it is the source of the apathy plague." She took a step forward, her eyes locking with Ash's. "We don't know what we are fighting." "You do." "We came here not to give orders, but to ask a question. What is our plan?" The question hung in the air. It was a formal surrender of authority, a desperate plea from the world's established protectors to the only ones who knew the truth. Ash looked at his team. At Greta's fiery readiness, Anabel's pained resolve, and Lucy's sharp, analytical focus. He was their leader, and now, the fate of the world rested on the next words out of his mouth. "The plan is simple," Ash said, his voice ringing with a conviction that cut through the fear in the room. "We cut the head off the snake. We go to Spear Pillar and we stop it. But we can't do it if we're being swarmed from below." He turned to the two champions. "That's where you come in. We need a path. The Null has been creating husks, an army of soulless Pokémon. They will be guarding that mountain. We need you to hold them back. Fight the battle on the slopes. Buy us the time we need to fight the war at the summit." Lance and Cynthia exchanged a look. It was a suicide mission, a holding action against an enemy of unknown strength. But it was a plan. Lance gave a sharp, decisive nod. "The Elite Four of Kanto and Sinnoh are already mobilizing. We will be your shield. My Garchomp and I will clear the path to the summit entrance," Cynthia added, her hand resting on her Pokémon's head. But once you are inside the mountain, you will be on your own. The psychic pressure near the peak will be too intense for any but the strongest-willed. That's all we need, Ash said. He turned to his team. Let's go. The ascent of Mount Coronet was a journey through a dying world. The lower slopes were a war zone. Cynthia's Garchomp was a blur of draconic fury, carving a path through hordes of Pokémon husks that swarmed from the caves and crevasses. They were a terrifying sight, Geodudes and Gravelers that rolled with silent, implacable purpose, swarms of Zubat that flew in perfect, unnerving formations, a massive Steelix that moved with the cold, relentless efficiency of a machine. They didn't roar or cry out. They just came, their eyes empty, their only purpose to stop them. Higher up, they could hear the sounds of a massive battle raging below them, the searing blast of a hyper beam, the crackle of a thunderbolt, the roar of a Dragonite. Lance and the others had engaged the main army. As they climbed higher, the air grew thin and bitingly cold. But it was the psychic pressure that was the real enemy. It was a physical weight, a crushing despair that sought to leech the very will to move from their limbs. Greta was breathing heavily, her usual fire banked by the oppressive atmosphere. Even her Hariyama seemed sluggish. Anabel was suffering the most. Every step was an agony. The sheer volume of despair radiating from the peak was like a constant scream in her mind. At one point, her knees buckled, and she would have collapsed if Greta hadn't caught her, throwing an arm around her shoulders. "I've got you," Greta grunted, her own face pale with effort. "Just keep moving. We're almost there." "I can't, shut it out," Anabel gasped, leaning heavily on her friend. "Don't shut it out," Lucy said, her voice sharp but not unkind. She was scouting the path ahead, her movements precise despite the pressure. "Use it. It is a source of information. Analyze it. Discern its patterns. Do not let it be a wave that drowns you. Let it be a current that guides you." It was the Pike Queen's cold logic, now repurposed as a lifeline. Anabel focused, her breathing steadying. She began to dissect the despair, finding the rhythms in its crushing waves. It was still painful, but now it was manageable. It was data. Ash led them, a beacon of unwavering resolve. The pressure affected him too, a cold hand gripping his heart, whispering thoughts of failure and loss. But he pushed them away, focusing on the bond with his team, the warmth of their presence beside him, a small fire against the encroaching cold. He thought of Lucy's smile, Greta's fierce loyalty, Anabel's gentle strength. They were his shield, and he was theirs. Finally, they reached the summit. They stepped out into the open air of Spear Pillar, and the world fell away. The sky was no longer gray. It was a swirling, non-color vortex of pure void, a chaotic tear in reality that seemed to be sucking the very light and color out of the world. The ancient stone pillars that gave the place its name groaned and cracked, lines of gray, dead rock spreading across them like a disease. In the center of the ruins, where the red chain had once bound the gods of time and space, the vortex was thickest. It was a swirling tornado of nothingness, a wound in the world. And guarding it were two figures that made Ash's blood run cold. They were colossal, magnificent, and utterly terrifying. One was a creature of metallic blue and silver, its body adorned with diamond-like gems that pulsed with a sick, decaying light. The other was a being of pearlescent white and magenta, its form seeming to warp and distort, the space around it bending at impossible angles. Dialga. And Palkia. But they were wrong. Their eyes, which should have held the wisdom of eons, were glowing with a hollow, despairing light. They were husks. Corrupted gods. "It can't be," Cynthia breathed from behind them, her voice filled with horrified reverence. She had fulfilled her promise and brought them to the entrance. She and her Garchomp stood as the last line of defense, blocking the path behind them. "It has them. It has the gods of creation." The corrupted Dialga let out a sound. It was not the proud roar of time. It was a gurgling, distorted cry of agony. A wave of temporal energy washed over the battlefield, and the stone at Dialga's feet aged 1,000 years in a second, crumbling to dust. Then, another wave washed back, and the dust reformed into stone. It was trapped in a horrifying loop of its own power, constantly decaying and rebirthing in a cycle of endless suffering. Palkia shrieked, a sound that tore at the fabric of space itself. A spatial rend erupted from its shoulder, but it was uncontrolled. It didn't shoot forward, it ripped a hole in the air next to Palkia, a gaping wound that showed a twisted, nightmarish version of the battlefield before snapping shut. It was wounding reality, and itself, over and over. "They're not fighting," Anabel cried out, her voice breaking with empathy as she felt their torment. "They're not guarding the vortex. They're trapped by it. It's using their despair as a power source. They're screaming." This was the Null's masterpiece. It hadn't just enslaved the gods, it had turned them into living batteries of anguish, their own immense power fueling the vortex that was consuming the world. "We can't fight them," Greta said, her usual battlelust gone, replaced by a horrified awe. "They're gods. And they're in pain." "Then we don't fight them," Lucy said, her mind racing, processing the impossible tactical situation. "We free them. Look." She pointed, her finger steady. "Their attacks are rhythmic. Desperate. Dialga's decay loop has a frequency. Palkia's spatial tears have a pattern. It's a feedback loop of despair. If we can disrupt the cycle, even for a second, we might be able to break them free." It was an insane plan. To step into the path of the chaotic fury of the gods of time and space. How? Ash asked, his gaze fixed on the suffering legends. "Greta," Lucy commanded, her voice sharp and clear, "you and your team are the shield. We need a massive, focused impact on Dialga, precisely between its decay and rebirth cycles. It will take all the power you have. Anabel, you are the timer. You can feel the rhythm of their pain. You have to give Greta the signal. The window will be less than a second." "And us?" Ash asked. "Palkia is the real danger," Lucy continued. "Its spatial distortions are unpredictable. We can't get close. But its power is focused on itself. We need to give it a new focus. A single, pure point of energy that can break through its distorted perception." She looked at him, her eyes intense. "You and Pikachu. Your aura. That thing you did at the battle pyramid. A volt tackle so pure, so full of positive energy, it can realign a god's senses. Anabel will have to give you the signal as well, at the exact moment Palkia's spatial rend falters." It was the most dangerous, most insane, most brilliant plan he had ever heard. It relied on their absolute, perfect synergy. "Let's do it," Ash said, no hesitation in his voice. "Pika." Pikachu cried from his shoulder, his cheeks sparking with a fierce, determined light. "Hariyama, Macamp, let's go." Greta roared, releasing her two fighting powerhouses. "We're the wall. Nobody gets past us." The three fighting types took a stance, bracing themselves against the waves of temporal and spatial energy. Anabel closed her eyes, her face a mask of concentration, her mind diving into the torrent of divine agony, searching for the beat, the rhythm, the tiny flaw in the pattern of despair. The pressure is building. Dialga is reaching the peak of its decay, Anabel's voice was strained, distant. "Greta, get ready." Greta and her Pokémon began to glow, their combined fighting spirit a tangible aura of golden light. "Now!" Anabel screamed. "All of you! Focus punch!" Greta bellowed. Three glowing fists, a trinity of pure fighting energy, slammed into Dialga's side in the infinitesimal pause between its decay and its renewal. The god roared, a sound of surprise rather than pain, its temporal loop stuttering for a single, crucial second. Palkia's field is destabilized by the backlash. Anabel cried out. "Ash, your window is now. Half a second, maybe less." Ash didn't need to speak. He focused his entire being, his love for his Pokémon, his bond with his team, his desperate hope for the world, and poured it all into the link with his partner. Pikachu. Now. For everything. Pikachu became a bolt of pure, unadulterated life. He launched himself from Ash's shoulder, a comet of golden light, not a weapon of destruction, but a beacon of pure, concentrated connection. He wasn't aiming for Palkia itself. He was aiming for the distorted space right in front of its face. The Volt tackle hit the spatial warp. There was no explosion. Just a single, pure, resonant chime, the same sound they had heard in the battle pyramid, but 1,000 times magnified. It was the sound of a bond striking a chord with the universe itself. The light that erupted was not a flash, but a wave. A wave of warmth, of clarity, of feeling. It washed over Palkia, and then over Dialga. The mad, hollow glow in their eyes flickered. The agonized cycles of their power faltered and stopped. They stood there, silent and exhausted, their divine minds suddenly, shockingly clear. They looked at the vortex, then at Ash and his team, not with aggression, but with a dawning understanding. They had been freed. But they had only treated the symptom. With its divine batteries disconnected, the vortex of the null seemed to enrage. It pulsed violently, a wave of pure nothingness expanding outward. The ground at Spear Pillar began to dissolve, not crumbling, but simply ceasing to be, eaten away by the expanding void. Dialga and Palkia, weakened but free, let out a combined roar, their power forming a fragile, shimmering barrier around the team, holding the encroaching nothingness at bay, but they were fading fast. It's not enough. Lucy yelled over the roar of the vortex. We only bought ourselves minutes. The anchor is almost complete. We can't fight it from here. It's a hole. We can't destroy a hole from the outside. She was right. They had won the battle, but the war was lost. The vortex was an absence, and they had nothing to fill it with. Ash looked at the encroaching void, held back by the struggling gods. He looked at the horrified, determined faces of his team. Greta, ready to punch the universe itself for him. Lucy, her brilliant mind already trying to calculate a solution where none existed. Anabel, her heart breaking for the world. He had led them here. He was their sovereign. And a sovereign's duty was to protect his people. He knew what he had to do. There was only one way. It was not a choice born of logic or strategy. It was a choice born of love. He turned to his team. You did it, he said, a strange, sad smile on his face. You saved them. Ash, what are you doing? Greta asked, a sudden, terrible fear in her voice. You have to go to the heart of it, he said, his eyes fixed on the swirling blackness. You can't fight the emptiness from the outside. You have to fill it from within. He took a step toward the vortex. No. Anabel screamed, realizing his intent. Ash, you can't. He turned back to look at them, his found family, his vanguard, his whole world. His gaze lingered on each of them for a fraction of a second, a silent goodbye. Your job is to hold the line. Protect the world until I get back. Lucy's composure finally shattered. Ash, don't. That's not a logical choice. It's suicide. Maybe, he said, his smile never wavering. He looked down at Pikachu, who was looking up at him, his small face a mask of understanding and sorrow. He knew. Of course he knew. Stay with them, buddy. Keep them safe for me. He gave his partner one last, gentle scratch under the chin. Then, before anyone could move to stop him, he turned, took a running start, and leaped. He didn't fall into the vortex. He dove. Head first, into the absolute, soul-devouring nothingness at the heart of the world's end. Greta screamed his name, a raw, ragged sound of pure agony. Lucy stared, her hand outstretched, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. Anabel collapsed to her knees, a choked sob escaping her lips. Ash Ketchum was gone. Swallowed by the silence. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.